A little girl in a blue dress is running across the snowy ground in an unknown direction, as if running away from something. The northern forest is a place where the power of nature is gathered. In the moment, the girl stops to survey the area around her. During a full moon, a rare phenomenon could be observed in the northern forest. The girl put her hand on her chest confusedly, suggesting that she had gone deep enough into the forest. The snowy and frozen ground shone with a bright white light, which is what the girl wanted to see. Under the light of the moon and snow, small lights like fireflies awaken. The girl notices how the whole forest around her has shone in its full glory. When she saw what she had longed for, the girl smiled happily. But if that light is touched by someone with witch's blood in her veins, a witch's keeper will appear. In a moment, the sky abruptly darkened and an eerie vortex appeared above the girl's head, from which a gruff voice sounded. I smell something. The real true one, said the unknown. Suddenly there was a loud shriek from a monotonous voice. I can smell it, said the unknown person. The air shuddered and streams of winter wind blew toward the girl. A creepy silhouette of a face emerged from the vortex in front of the girl's face. The girl panicked violently, waving her arms in an attempt to drive the demon away. What is it? She screamed. The girl covers her face with her hand from fear and the strong flow of wind. At that moment, a black cat jumps out of the funnel and rushes towards the defenseless girl. The still frightened girl clenched her eyes tightly, not wanting to look at the full horror of the funnel. The witch's descendant's voice sounded again. The girl, assuming she had found what she had come for, opened her eyes through the wind currents. The voice she heard interested her. It was more human than the previous one. The small paws of a black cat appear out of the streams of wind and smoke. You finally found me, the unknown man added. A small-sized cat appears in front of the girl. You're alone here, the cat asked. The northern forest gradually calmed down and quieted down. The girl, seeing the talking cat, was still frightened, covering her mouth with her palm, decides to ask if the cat is the keeper of the ancient witches. The cat stares at the girl without saying a word, waiting for her to make the very request for which she has come all this way. The girl lowers her hand and clenches it into a fist. Suddenly the girl shouted loudly throughout the forest, "Save my mom!" All the birds sitting innocently on the branches of the trees rumbled up into the sky. Clenching her little fists, the girl once again turns to the cat, asking him to save her mom. At this point, the girl is immersed in her memories. Namely, before moving into the novel, she was an ordinary orphan, and when she grew up, she became a teacher in a kindergarten. The woman was happy enough because she was proud of her work, but on the last day of his previous life, there was an accident. People got off the bus that had hit the woman and rushed around trying to help. At the last moment, the woman only managed to see someone's shoes coming in her direction, and then she found herself in the world of the novel she had been reading in her lifetime. Please Forget Me, that was the title of the novel. It was a story known for its tragedy, starring Cullen and his soulmate Yuri. The actions of the novel began in the Empire of Fairs, where all the characters lived. There was divine power in this world. The power of Laverick was a gift given by God, which everyone wanted to have. With this power, people were healed and evil spirits were cast out. It was a ray of light that led ordinary mortals to the gates of heaven. The Empire of Furze rejected all powers except the divine one. The opposite of divine power was the power of witches, namely witchcraft. Anticipation, illusions, controlling the elements, and summoning a familiar. The witches' powers were quite versatile, both in form and power. But no one would be able to resist the regular hunts from the shrine for long. Several of the witches in the circle were discussing recent events, namely that all the sanctuary's prisoners had been wiped out, and at this rate all witches would soon be gone. The power of witches was passed down through the mother's line through generations, and they tried to protect themselves and their kind at all costs. Therefore, to prevent a child born with the power of a witch from awakening her gift at a young age, they endowed certain things with magic in order to slow down the awakening. Only at a realized age, then, witches could feel the attraction to these things and learn about their abilities, whether it was a book, a broom, or any other household object. So, too, the protagonist Yuri was able to feel the magic in things by touching one book in the library. Taking out a book with an extraordinary blue cover, Yuri suddenly awakened her powers. Contrary to the law that says a witch's power is passed down through generations, her daughter in the womb had also awakened and become a witch. The woman fell to her knees in the library and clutched her stomach. At that moment, Yuri and her child suddenly gained powerful strength. However, the woman's body began to weaken day by day, but she continued to think about the baby, not her health. A woman is determined to hide the fact that her daughter is a witch. The woman decides to pray and ask for God's help because she didn't want everyone to find out during the blessing ceremony. The woman decides to escape with her maid Dahlia, erasing all traces of herself with the help of sorcery. Under the cover of night in a heavy downpour, taking a small suitcase, they leave once and for all from their familiar city, so that neither the shrine nor Cullen could not find the girl. The end of the story is a tragic death, but the girl manages to be born the daughter of the protagonist of this novel. Yuri smiles sweetly as she looks at her daughter, naming her Mariette Dilton. Mariette was an orphan in her past life and never received a mother's love. Yuri puts her hand on the girl's face and apologizes to her for making her go through all the trouble. Mariette, with a sweet smile, asks her mother not to worry, explaining that she enjoys traveling. Mariette loved Yuri very much, who had become a real mother to her and gave her all her love. The woman smiled back at her daughter and motioned for them to move on. Mariette continues the story that they continued to desperately avoid all the traps set by the shrine and tried their best to change the story of the novel. Mariette eventually still managed to avoid her death, which was to be on her 5th birthday, because of which she was able to spend it with her mother. However, Yuri's health was only getting worse each time. Yuri continued to shower her daughter with motherly love as best she could. Mariette, walking through the forest, suggests to her mother to go not to the right this time, but towards the north, where it snows every day. Mariette wished to find the familiar of an ancient witch that resided in the northern forest. It was a rare guardian in the form of a cat that most witches had never even seen. Mariette wanted to help save her mother as much as she could. Clenching her fists, she decided to ask for the help of her familiar. Mariette struggled to find the keeper, but it was too late. It was raining and thundering outside. The girl, along with her maid Dahlia, standing over Yuri's coffin, the room was completely silent with the occasional sob of the little girl. Mariette returned home with the hope that everything would work out, but it was too late. Yuri had died of an unknown illness. Dahlia stayed with little Mariette and tried to comfort. Mistress Yuri had gone to a better place, she added. A lone raven sat near Mariette's house and asked her not to be sad. Even the guardian, who had taken the form of a crow, comforted Mariette. Everyone around her was trying to be supportive, but even though it was her mother's funeral, the girl couldn't fully surrender to the sadness. Mariette hugged Dahlia, wondering only one thing: if the shrines would now be able to detect her and kill her. Though Mariette cried, she had no idea what the sanctuary could do to her, nor to Dahlia. The girl was truly terrified of the future. Wiping away her tears, Mariette realized everything that was going on and the complexity of the situation. She couldn't be sad about losing her mother. Suddenly, the door to Mariette's house opens and a man's shoes appear on the doorstep, which the girl immediately notices. A soaked man, due to the heavy rain, slowly walks through the door. His hair is loose, tossed back carelessly with a cold and gloomy look with a tinge of death. The man approached the coffin and kneeled and bowed his head. Mariette and Dahlia still watched in silence. The girl immediately recognized him at first sight. Yuri was lying lifeless in a coffin decorated with flowers and various herbs. The man could not believe that Yuri was no longer in the world. The man was the protagonist of the novel. Cullen was in mourning at the sight of the woman, only uttering her name one last time. Mariette looked at the man in silence, realizing that it was Cullen who was her father. Letting go of Dahlia, Mariette slowly approached the man, calling Cullen her father. The man jerked slightly upon hearing that. Mariette realized that all she cared about now was to survive at all costs, for she was powerless to stand up for herself. Cullen, stunned at what he heard, turned silently toward the little girl. Mariette looked at Cullen with tears in her eyes, realizing she needed someone's protection right now. Mariette set her sights on revenge against the shrine that forced her mother to live in perpetual fear. Yuri often told Mariette about her father. Sitting in the girls' room in the evenings, Yuri couldn't stop as she described Cullen. Only Dahlia would pull Yuri away from the stories and remind her what time it was. On one such day, Yuri asked in the future, when Mariette met her father, to take care of him. Mariette didn't understand why her mother would ask such a thing. After all, she was only a child and Khaled was an adult. Through a smile, Yuri explains that although Mariette's father is grown up and strong, but very stupid, so the girl needs to hug him tightly and take care of him. Mariette is amused that her mom calls her dad tough and grown up, but stupid. Yuri raised her pinky finger upwards with a smile, asking her daughter to give the communication to her. Mariette listened attentively to her mother and immediately made a promise to take care of her father. The girl felt that the little finger that encompassed her finger was very thin. Yuri had become very weak after giving birth to Mariette, but even so, she did her best. Mariette realized that her mother's death and her father's future tragedy had only herself to blame. Cullen sat by the coffin for a long time, unable to believe that Yuri was gone. Cullen didn't eat for a long time, only staring at the coffin, continuing to ask only one question: why Yuri? Mariette realized that if this continued, Cullen might die like her mother. Cullen was a man who would sacrifice his life for the woman he loved. To other women, Cullen was cold, but he treated Yuri with warmth and love. That is why, after the loss of his beloved, the whole world collapsed for him, because nothing else was of any value. Mariette, realizing that now is not the time to be sad, wipes the tears from her eyes and waves away the bad thoughts. Mariette recalled earlier making a promise to her mother to take care of her father. In that moment, Mariette wished only to prevent Cullen from falling. The man continued to sit by the coffin under the moonlight. The girl was warmed only by the memories of her mother's love and care, which meant she had to fulfill Yuri's last request. The girl slowly came closer and touched her father's military uniform with her small hand. Mariette's eyes filled with tears again. It was hard for her to hold back her emotions, but Cullen, like a real man, didn't cry or even frown, keeping all the sadness in his heart. In part, Mariette found her father's expression odd. The man sat nonchalantly beside Yuri's coffin, remembering warm moments with the girl. Mariette, clutching her black dress, nevertheless decides to turn to her father. Reluctantly, Mariette could only mumble the word, mother. The girl's thoughts were filled only with preventing her father from falling. Mariette decides to add that her mom doesn't like to be cried on. Cullen continued to stare coldly at the girl, clarifying if she did. Mariette was still creeped out by her father's cold-bloodedness and rigidity, causing her to back away slightly. Startled, Mariette ran behind Daliette's dress. Cullen was surprised that the girl just ran away from him after all the words. The man only lowered his head without saying a word. Mariette also looked at her father. Mariette assumed that Cullen would be less sad now and be able to bear such a serious loss. A couple of days later, Cullen's servants helped with Yuri's funeral. The house where Mariette lived was surrounded by luxurious carriages and a large number of people. Standing in the backyard, Mariette watched as several servants carried the coffin to be loaded into the carriage. Mariette's concern at the moment was that if things continued like this, her father would take her to the shrine. As the servants continued to load the coffin into the carriage, the girl thought of a plan to prevent the blessing ceremony, for then everyone would know she was a witch. Moving closer, Mariette decides to grab her father by the pant leg and address him. Mariette, with sparks in her eyes, asks Cullen not to take Yuri to the sanctuary. Cullen, in his repertoire, nonchalantly clarified with his daughter why she was against it. Taking her hand off Cullen's pant leg, the girl explains that it was Yuri who asked not to receive a god's blessing after death. At this point, Dahlia came up as well, assuring that Yuri really didn't want this so they could bury her next to the wildflowers where her soul could find peace. Cullen silently listens to the woman turn around and walk away in the opposite direction without a word. Mariette was slightly alarmed that her father had left without saying anything. Dahlia turns to the girl, wondering if she's all right. Mariette lowers her head and decides to let Dahlia go with the request that she return to her parents. The woman was shocked by what she heard. The woman puts her hand to her chest and doesn't understand what the girl is talking about, for she is ready to continue to serve and care for Mariette. Mariette did not want to put Dahlia in danger, for she continued to want to take care of her. The girl abruptly starts to run towards her father. Taking Cullen by the sleeve, Mariette assures the woman that everything will be fine. The girl declares that she now has a father who will take care of her. Cullen, not knowing what to answer, continues to stand silently and nonchalantly by his daughter's side. Cullen, having considered the situation, declares that he will take Mariette with him and take care of her. Dahlia didn't want to leave the girl, struggling to stay and continue to be by the girl's side. Mariette realized that Dahlia was already family to her, but she didn't want to take the woman to such a dangerous place where the irreparable could happen at any moment. Dahlia, realizing the complexity of the situation, agrees with Mariette's decision and hands her a handful of candy. The woman smilingly asked the girl to eat only one candy a day. Mariette smiled back at the woman and added that she would always wash it down with water. Dahlia says goodbye to Mariette and asks her to take care of herself and watch her health. After getting into the carriage provided by Cullen, Dahlia left for her homeland. Maria stood in the road and followed Dahlia's gaze until the carriage disappeared from her sight. It was actually hard for Marie to say goodbye to the last person she knew, but such was fate. Cullen didn't know what to say, but tilted his head toward his daughter. Mariette, noticing this, wonders what her father wanted. The man states without any emotion that he doesn't know what to do because it's his first time having a child. Mariette adds with a smile that this is also the first time she has had a father. In her heart, Mariette was scared, but she realized she couldn't hide and avoid the world forever. Mariette wished with all her might to change the future and save her father from ruin. Abruptly, Cullen turns around and heads for the carriage behind him. The man casually adds, to be careful of any dirt that might be clinging. Mariette was taken aback by such words from her father, assuming that she was the one to whom the man was saying it. The two men abruptly climbed out of the bushes, agreeing to their superior's order. Mariette jerked slightly at the suddenness. Mariette was confused as to where all these people could have come from. The men walked slowly through the bushes to the carriage. Mariette, distracted by the strangers, was equally impressed by the luxurious carriage she was to ride in with her father. As she gets closer, Mariette realizes she's unable to climb without someone's help. The girl immediately turns to her father, hinting that she needs help. Cullen looks at his daughter nonchalantly. Cullen only wonders if the carriage step is high for her. Mariette was outraged at this reaction from her father, for in her past life, all the adults had lifted children who couldn't climb up on their own. The adults of her past world were only too happy to help a child in difficulty. Mariette, being a conscious adult, could only feel sad about her short stature. Cullen's hand reached toward his daughter. The man decides to act and carelessly lifts Mariette by the collar, causing her to scream loudly. Mariette was terrified. For just a little more and Cullen would strangle her with his dead grip. A crow sitting on a branch continued to watch the little witch, adding that Mariette's face had turned very red. Cullen didn't understand what was happening to his daughter. Unable to stand it, Mariette shouted again, asking her to stop because no one lifts children like that. Cullen immediately puts the girl on the ground, asking what he should fix. Mariette stands up on her own feet, shaking off the dust. After finishing tidying up, the girl explains that her father should do things more carefully. Cullen, taking the girl's words as a challenge, raises Mariette over his head like a lion king. Cullen, holding Mariette, begins to overreact and take the girl's hands more firmly. Mariette couldn't contain her emotions, for Cullen took her too tightly as if he wanted to tear her arms off. Mariette remembers those warm times when she would sit on her mother's lap and talk about her father. Back in reality, Mariette only laughed wearily, realizing the complexity of the situation, for Yuri was indeed right in her description of her father. Mariette took her suitcase of belongings and set off with her father. Mentally, Mariette also informed the raven to follow the carriage and not to get lost. The raven assured her that the girl should not worry. Cullen saw the suitcase in Mariette's hands and asked if it was too tight, offering to put it away. Mariette was a little taken aback by this, for there was plenty of room in the carriage, imagining at least 2 more bears sitting beside her father. Mariette replied that everything was fine. In her mind, the girl realized that the suitcase was too precious to her, for it held all her dresses made by Yuri. Smiling, Mariette hugged the suitcase tighter, remembering her beloved mother. Cullen leans on the carriage door and decides to add that his daughter looks a lot like Yuri. Mariette replied nothing, also recalling that Dahlia had often spoken of the similarities as well. Mariette was slightly embarrassed by her father's words. She had not imagined that they would have to drive all the way without stopping. Mariette only looked at her father, saying nothing about the difficult trip. Cullen noticed this and only looked at his daughter nonchalantly, not realizing that Mariette was very tired from the trip. Mariette could not believe that her father's body did not ache at all, for she herself was getting heavier each time. Cullen continued to sit in silence, not even paying attention to the fact that it had been a really long trip. Mariette resented in her mind the fact that her father was completely unaware of it. Suddenly at the carriage door, someone knocked and turned to Cullen for a word. The man on the horse asked the gentleman if they could set up a rest stop in the woods. Cullen immediately assumed that their carriage had merely broken down and it was a forced stop. The man decides to kindly explain to the gentleman that most likely Mariette is very tired of going without rest. Cullen again looks nonchalantly at the girl. Cullen agrees with the guard's decision to make a brief stop for his daughter. Mariette couldn't be happy in her heart at the long-awaited stop and a little rest. After briefly preparing the camp, the coachman approaches the carriage and announces that a resting place has been prepared for Mariette and Cullen. Mariette bowed to the coachman, thanking him for his work. The elderly coachman was slightly embarrassed that his master's daughter was bowing. In her thoughts, Mariette couldn't be happy that the man had done so much for them, noting that although she didn't like mustachioed men, the older man was an exception. After sitting down in a chair and relaxing, Mariette, with a smile, offers her father to sit with her as well. Cullen only coldly replied that it was fine and he would stand. Mariette notices the knight standing behind Cullen and realizes that they are really hard at work in her father's administration. Bored with being alone, Mariette decides to draw something on the ground. Cullen notices his daughter getting off the chair and starts looking for something. Cullen decides to see what Mariette is going to do and stay out of the way. Finding a rock nearby, Mariette decides to draw something on the ground. Cullen wonders what his daughter is trying to draw. Mariette explains with a smile that the moon is pictured at the top and the stars rising at the bottom. Mariette is once again immersed in memories, for it was her mother who showed it to her. The girl remembered well because they had no paper and had to draw on the ground. The girl also recalled her mother periodically drawing shapes on her cheek with her finger, which Mariette liked very much. Cullen lowered his gaze slightly, remembering a familiar pattern associated with Yuri. Mariette also recalls that in her past life, in addition to reading, she was also interested in drawing. Cullen, thinking that they need to go further, asks Mariette to return to the carriage. The girl is not playing, drawing something on the ground, and asks her to wait. Suddenly, Cullen stops and raises his arms horizontally. Mariette was slightly startled by this, from not understanding why her father spread his arms. Mariette stiffened in anticipation, assuming her father had finally decided to hug her. Cullen slowly began to approach his daughter, but unfortunately Cullen merely took Mariette under his arm and carried her towards the carriage. Mariette resents her father holding her like a toy again in her thoughts, adding that this is the first time this has happened to her. Mariette didn't understand why her mother described Cullen as a classy man. Mariette also knew that Cullen was actually the best sword in the Empire and was coveted by both the shrine and the Emperor. Mariette realized that although he was a good swordsman, her father was absolute zero at handling children. Mariette is confused and decides before saving her father's life and her own to make Cullen a normal person. The next day, the carriage arrived at Descartes Manor where Cullen lived. Cullen took his daughter's hands in his, as he had earlier, and lifted her to chest level. Mariette was delighted with the luxurious estate. Suddenly, Cullen lets his daughter go to her feet, explaining that this place will now be her home. Following, as unemotional as ever, he added that this was where she was originally supposed to live. Mariette said nothing, but repeated in her mind that she was originally supposed to live here. She thought the words sounded strange. The manor was much more amazing than Mariette thought it would be. It was very large and well-maintained. Mariette was surprised that there were no more than 10 servants in the manor. At a glance, Mariette realized that the servants were exhausted from the amount of work, all of them looking tired and with puffy eyes. It also seemed to Mariette that all the servants were looking at her too strangely. In fact, they were all amazed that Miss Mariette was actually alive. Suddenly, an unknown man in a black suit emerges from the back. Mariette's attention was immediately drawn to him. Placing a hand on his chest, the man announced that they had already prepared Mariette's room next to the Lord's room. While Descartes bowed to Miss Mariette, the girl watched the man's actions in silence. Mariette struck a pose and put her hands on her belt, stating that she had recently met her father, and therefore she was still her mother's daughter. Descartes' face changed dramatically with a slight twitch. In his mind, he was emphasizing that Mariette was very much like his master. The girl also notices that Descartes changed in his face, as did all the servants before him. Descartes lowered his head and smiled, introducing himself to Mariette as Dante Evian. Descartes also adds that he will help and make sure Mariette is comfortable by asking the girl to address him informally. After listening to the manager, Mariette clarifies if she can call him Descartes. Descartes gave a friendly chuckle, confirming her words. Mariette was slightly startled by his cheerfulness. Cullen decides to move on, coldly adding that Mariette doesn't have to be friends with Descartes, as he can walk her to the room himself. The girl immediately hurries after her father. Mariette notes in her mind that she didn't really want to be friends with him herself. Cullen explains that this is her room, where Mariette will be staying. Mariette realized this at once, for only this door had flowers hanging on it. Descartes caught up with the couple and added that the next room belonged to the gentleman. Mariette opened the door slightly and immediately observed the huge room, which surprised her a little because she thought it would be much smaller. Cullen throws the suitcase on the floor and asks his daughter to rest. Mariette sees all the things and is greatly fascinated. Distracted for a second, abruptly the door behind them closed with a clatter. Mariette noticed and realized that her father had simply left. Mariette takes the suitcase and immediately decides to sort out her things. The girl remembers her mother again because the suitcase used to belong to her. In the suitcase were 3 dresses that Yuri had made for her daughter. Mariette took them all out and spread them out on the floor. A few dresses were made from shawls and cotton and a coat that Yuri had made from her fur. As she sniffed, Mariette smelled her mother's scent again. Suddenly, a voice came from somewhere outside. Descartes tried to dissuade Cullen from rash action, for he had served his master all this time and knew exactly what he was thinking. Suddenly, Descartes sighed heavily, realizing where this was going and the fact that he had no power to affect it. Folding his arms and looking coldly in Descartes' direction, the man inquired, "Why not?" Descartes adds that if the emperor had not turned a blind eye to all this, the sanctuary would have intervened and the whole thing would have failed. Mariette watched silently through the crack in the door. Mariette continued to stare at the door, listening to Dante's words, the man asking Cullen to pull himself together for his daughter's sake. Mariette knew that in the novel, Cullen had searched for Yuri all over the continent, and if some tried to lie for the reward and others wanted to hide something because of fear, he killed them mercilessly. Descartes asks Cullen to come to his senses, explaining that it is impossible by any means to revive a dead man. Descartes adds that for Miss Mariette, Cullen is now a pillar of support. Mariette sat down on the floor and slightly saddened, realizing that if it was really possible, she would have taken advantage of it long ago. Descartes repeatedly asks Cullen to pull himself together, and then Mariette will feel safe too. Descartes is slightly overexcited and loudly proclaims that Mariette is only 6 years old. Suddenly unable to stand it, Cullen demands with a cold stare that Descartes shut his mouth. Mariette also noticed that her father's voice had become as cold as ice. The girl noted that Cullen was balanced around her, and she thought he was unemotional. Mariette clenched her fists. It became clear to her that her father had been holding back in front of her all this time. Mariette decides to continue sorting through her things, shifting her dresses. Smelling her coat again, the girl realizes that her mother's scent has already begun to disappear. Mariette was disappointed by this, but she accepted it and decided to hang up all her clothes so they wouldn't get wrinkled. Mariette looked around and realized that all the furniture in this room was too big for her height. Looking around again, Mariette also noticed that her room didn't even have a chair to climb into. At that moment, the keeper knocked on the window, after which he added that he had arrived. Mariette opened the window and was overjoyed at the sight of the keeper. The girl immediately asked if it was difficult for the raven to fly that far. The keeper praised his persistence and assured her that it was a piece of cake for him. Mariette, with a smile, immediately asked the raven to help her. She wanted the keeper to get a small wooden footstool. The keeper immediately said that he knew where such a shelf was. Mariette asked him to bring it, for the raven was the keeper. The raven added that he was the keeper, not the girl's servant. Mariette called the keeper as bad as her father. Mariette decided to take the second option. Using her cute looks, she again asked to bring the footrest, as she was having a very hard time. The guardian teasingly suggested eating more bread for that purpose. Mariette's face changed dramatically to one of displeasure. Resigned, Mariette decides to ask the keeper to tell her where to find the wooden footstool. After taking the right thing, the girl heads back to her room. Mariette was slightly amazed that all the servants each brought a few footstools. They all declared with glee that it was their job and it was their duty to help the girl. Mariette, accompanied by several maids, carried wooden footstools to the girl's room. Mariette could not understand where so many servants had come from, for she had only seen a few people at the beginning. Mariette assumed that all the servants had been hiding all this time. In fact, the maids were indeed hiding, waiting for the right moment to speak to Mariette. All the maids could not contain their emotions at the minuteness and beauty of Mariette. They were blown away by the moth that had not been in the manor for a long time. Approaching Mariette's room, one of the maids wonders what the girls are using so many wooden planks for. With a smile on her face, Mariette explained to the maid that all the furniture in the room was too high and she needed to get all her things out somehow. All the servants were startled at what they heard, for it was their duty to help Miss Mariette. Realizing they've got it all wrong, the maids immediately throw the wood into the fireplace. Several women immediately begin stuffing pillows with cotton. Making the pillow more dense, the maid places it on the floor and asks to use it as a footstool. Mariette asks the maid not to bother so much. The servants were greatly touched that Miss Mariette didn't even ask them for such a small thing, suggesting how difficult her life has been. One of the women asks to call them in the future if Mariette needs help. The girl obediently agrees with the servants. Suddenly, footsteps sounded outside the door, which Mariette did not immediately hear. Unbeknownst to the girl, Dante was behind her back, which startled Mariette greatly. Turning around, Mariette greeted Dante with a smile, clarifying with the man what had happened. Dante placed a hand on his chest and smiled as he invited Mariette to dinner. Going down to the first floor to the banquet hall, Mariette saw the table fully set with various dishes. Cullen, sitting at the head of the table and drinking wine, asked his daughter not to be shy and to eat. Mariette was delighted by such a sumptuous serving of food, awkwardly agreeing with her father to begin the meal. Mariette couldn't believe there were so many dishes on the table, since she had only eaten one dish per meal before. Mariette notices Cullen drinking wine elegantly, assuming it's some kind of alcohol. Mariette still decides to tell her father that you can't start a meal with alcohol. Cullen immediately turns his attention to his daughter. Stopping to sip his wine, Cullen looks at his daughter with a cold stare. Smiling, the girl shook slightly in fear. Mariette hoped it was unlikely that her father had been killed right at the table. Hearing his daughter, Cullen actually put a glass of wine on the table. Taking the cutlery, Cullen decides to clarify where he should otherwise begin his meal. Mariette was amazed that her father would actually ask his young daughter about this, assuming that he must have learned it in so many years. Mariette, realizing the complexity of the situation, declares that she will tell everything from beginning to end, adding that first Callan should wish everyone a pleasant appetite and thank those who prepared the food. The cooks and servants serving dishes abruptly began to cover their faces in fear and embarrassment, not wanting to be noticed by the Lord. Mariette didn't understand why those were so afraid of her father. Cullen listens to his daughter, wishes her a pleasant appetite, and proceeds to eat. Mariette, having read that she was worried for nothing, decides to continue her training as she has previously been an educator. Mariette holds out her fork towards her father, repeatedly asking him to say thank you. Cullen really thought about it. It was hard for him to say something like that out loud. Mariette adds that she can squint too. All the servants kept shaking. They were really scared for their lives. With difficulty and without any emotion, Cullen thanked all the servants. Everyone was able to exhale. Cullen immediately clarifies with his daughter if that is enough. Mariette realizes that she shouldn't have insisted on having the last word. After seeing how Mariette handles cutlery, Cullen decides to ask if Yuri taught the girl how to use a knife that way. Mariette says she did. Mariette decides to tell her that Yuri was very sick, and so she didn't have to exert herself unnecessarily. Mariette helped Dahlia with the cooking, but on days when she went out for firewood, the girl had to eat alone. All the servants behind the table were very moved, covering their eyes with tears. Mariette didn't immediately realize what had happened. Cullen, after listening to his daughter, decides to drink wine again. Mariette was not going to let her father drink alcohol. With a smile, Mariette points out to her father that his steak is already cold and he should continue eating. Distracted by the wine, Cullen once again continues to cut his steak and eat. After that, the entire meal, because Mariette said the meat would get cold soon, Cullen continued to eat only it, no vegetables. Mariette was a little downcast, for her father took everything literally. Mariette decides to add that her mom taught her that the diet should be varied and you should eat 3 spoonfuls of vegetables for 1 piece of meat, then demonstrates this. Cullen agrees and eats as his daughter tells him to. Mariette realizes that it is too hard to feed an adult. Mariette notices that all the broccoli Cullen leaves are set aside. Finished eating, Cullen clarifies if he should speak towards the end of the meal. Very tasty. With a smile, Mariette nods approvingly to her father. Still just as unemotional, Cullen adds that at least he guessed right on this one. All the servants were also happy for the gentleman that he answered correctly and also ate more than 5 spoonfuls of the cook's dish. The servants thanked Miss Mariette for her excellent work. Cullen sharply demanded that everyone shut their mouths. There was a sepulchral silence in the hall again. No one could dare interrupt it after the Lord's words. Mariette realizes that in addition to eating, she has to correct her father's manner of speaking, assuming it will be problematic if she makes another remark. So passed the first dinner of Cullen and Mariette, during which the man did not touch alcohol. While already in the room, Descartes informs her that the maids will help Mariette with her washing, asking her to ask him otherwise. Mariette nods approvingly in response. Descartes shows a bell in the room and asks to use it if Mariette needs anything during the night, and then a man will arrive immediately. Descartes adds that if Mariette is uncomfortable with him, he will immediately call the maids. Mariette adds with a smile that she is comfortable with him. Kneeling in front of Mariette's bed, Descartes thanks her for everything. Mariette doesn't quite understand what the man is saying. Descartes also decides to add that although Mariette is unaccustomed to such a large estate, she deserves praise for her resilience. Descartes decides to explain that their master has been looking for the Yuri and daughter for too long, and the fact that he doesn't come to you now was all due to guilt. Cullen thought he didn't deserve forgiveness. Descartes calls his master not a bad man as it may seem at first glance, so asks that Mariette be patient and wait. Mariette listened silently to everything the butler told her. Mariette knew that in the original story, Dante had sacrificed himself to save his father by taking on several flying blades. That meant the man was very loyal to Cullen. In her thoughts, Mariette really wanted to turn to Dante and tell him that she was actually a witch, destined to die at the hands of the shrine, and that the man would protect her father. Smiling, Mariette really wanted to tell the truth, but in reality, she only agreed with the man. Dante thanked Miss Mariette again and wished her a good night. Mariette also said good night to the man. After Dante left, the maids came in to help Mariette get ready for bed. Mariette didn't want the maids to touch her mother's dress, so she asked them to let her undress herself. The maids assured Mariette that they would be very careful to make sure that nothing happened to the clothes she treasured so much. When she heard their caring words, Mariette calmed down a little. The servants also helped Mariette take a bath, which pleased her a lot because before, when she washed with Dahlia, she felt like she was in a Korean public bath. But after the bath, Yuri kissed Mariette goodnight. Mariette continued to recall the wonderful days with her small family, but suddenly the girl heard a knock and was abruptly awakened. Jumping up from the bed, Mariette didn't realize what the sound was or where it was coming from. Assuming that the sound was coming from her father's room, Mariette decides to check on him. Upon entering her father's room, the first thing Mariette notices is a huge mountain of liquor bottles. Cullen himself was sitting on the couch at the end of the room, asleep and completely oblivious to Mariette's presence. It was the first time Mariette saw Cullen's room. It was overflowing with liquor bottles. The girl assumed that her father always drank like that while he was searching for her and her mother, killing people along the way. Mariette also recalls that the first day they met, he smelled strongly of blood. Immediately, Mariette assumed it was alcohol that couldn't smell, so she looked at several bottles. Mariette walked up to her father and added that it was more complicated than that, and Cullen was even more broken than she had realized. Mariette also realized that right now the sanctuary was unaware of her existence, and so she was safe for now. But in the not-too-distant future, she would have to come face-to-face with them. Mariette sits down on her bed in the lotus position and decides to hurry up and make her father a normal person. While meditating, there was a strange sound outside the window, and Mariette awakened abruptly. The guardian sat in the guise of a cat, knocking on the window and asking the descendant to let him in. Mariette reminded him that he had refused to help her, and now he was coming back. Opening the window, the keeper immediately jumped on the bed. Mariette noticed that he was on time, and she wanted to talk to him. Mariette turns to the keeper and calls him, the keeper of the ancient witch. The cat immediately points out that the girl can call him by a less long name. Cat adds that they can come up with some new name that only the two of them will know. Mariette didn't quite understand why just the two of them. The guardian explains that's what they used to do with the former witch. Mariette is surprised at the word ex. To her, it sounded like a cat talking about an ex-girlfriend. The keeper explains that this is not the first time he has come to this world. Mariette suggests that the keeper protects all the witches who have summoned him. The guardian agrees and simultaneously denies, explaining that he is at the same time him and at the same time them. The guardian goes on to explain the basics to Mariette, that when he disappears, all of his memories are passed on to the next generation because they were all originally created from a force of nature. The guardian assumes that Mariette had already known this before. Mariette explains that she could only have heard it somewhere, but in fact she had known it for a long time from the novel. Mariette also wonders how long it has been since he met the last witch. The guardian states that it has been approximately 300 years. Mariette was amazed at such a huge number. The guardian, stretching as cats do, lazily adds that it used to take 500 years. Mariette also knew from the novel that many witches died before they even knew the guardian existed. The guardian clarifies again what Mariette is going to call him after all. Mariette immediately suggests the name Night, but the guardian did not like this option, and the next few. Mariette was mortified that the keeper didn't like a single name. Suddenly, she offers one last option, Kun. Mariette describes the name as something powerful, angelic. The guardian instantly agrees, looking at her mistress with burning eyes. Mariette approves the name Kun and is going to call the keeper that from now on. The keeper agrees and calls himself Kun. Finished with the name, Mariette asks the keeper to go back to what she originally wanted to ask the one. Mariette reminds the guardian that she sought him out to save her mother, but she also wanted to ask for her protection as well. Mariette talked to Kun for a long time afterward. The relationship between the shrine and the witches is the reason she and her mother had to flee the city. The guardian couldn't believe his ears, for in his opinion, the pathetic lowlifes who only knew how to fix little things had turned into such monsters. Mariette clenches her small fists and declares that she cannot be seen by the shrine until she has awakened her powers. The guardian asks if the girl is asking him to help her awaken them. Mariette reminds Kun that his role as keeper is to protect the witches and make them stronger. Mariette loudly declared that as soon as she got her powers, she would stop the witch hunt and take revenge on the shrine, adding that it would be better for the guardian if the witches were revived again. Closing her eyes, Mariette hoped that the guardian hearing this would agree to help her. After a brief moment of deliberation, Kun agrees to help the girl because the fact that little Mariette was able to summon him is destiny. Relieved at what she had heard, Mariette plumped down on her pillow with a peaceful soul. Turning circles around Mariette, Kun offers another option. The girl wonders what the keeper is talking about. The guardian remarks that if she really wants power, she can ask her father, as there is indeed a lot of power in his gaze. Kun also adds that Mariette is too young to do anything. After the words about age, Mariette smirked slightly, for she had clearly felt her age when she was with her mother. Rising to her feet, Mariette's face changed to a more serious one and stated that she was the one who needed to do this. The guardian adds that he understands Mariette's seriousness, but points out that she needs to get some sleep and close her eyes already. The guardian climbed on top of Mariette and waved his paw in front of her face. In his thoughts, he noted that he was meeting the little witch for the first time. Mariette embarrassedly explains that she is just really exhausted and tired after the road that day. Kun remarks that it's already obvious with the offer to talk later. Mariette says goodbye to the keeper and offers to talk the next day. Kun also says goodbye to the witch. Closing her eyes, Mariette wished that tonight she could dream of her mother and the day they had just arrived in the north, when it was a warm summer, where it was very peaceful and joyful. The next day when Mariette woke up, she still remembered her mother. Suddenly, someone called the girl away, noting that she was awake. As soon as Mariette opened her eyes, the maids came into the room. One of the girls greeted the girl and introduced herself by name Calfina, and two other girls as Lucy and Luna. Every time Mariette wanted to do something herself, all the maids desperately asked her to let them help. They all wanted to babysit the master's little daughter. In the end, Mariette found herself unable to refuse them. The maids dressed little Mariette. She wondered where her father was, thinking that from what she had seen yesterday he was going to have a hard time. Fina explained to Mariette that the gentleman had business to attend to, so he and Dante had left early in the morning and it wouldn't be until closer to evening that they would return. Mariette didn't fully understand how her father could easily function after so many bottles of alcohol after last night, assuming it might not have been alcohol at all. The maids all chorused that they would be sure to tell Dante's steward that Mariette was very worried. Mariette didn't understand why they were so concerned about it. So passed the first noisy morning of Mariette and the three maids. She looked out of the window and asked Fina if she could go out into the garden. Mariette realized that waiting for her father until evening would be boring. Stepping out into the hallway, the first thing Mariette saw was her father in luxurious clothes and looking acceptable after such a night. Mariette was greatly surprised at her father's presence, for the maids had just a moment ago reported Cullen's departure. There was silence in the hallway. Mariette noticed that the sun would not be setting for a while, and her father was already back so early. Suddenly smelling a strange odor, Mariette immediately covered her nose with the palm of her hand. Cullen, noticing his daughter covering her nose in his presence, wonders what's wrong. Mariette wondered if she could even talk about such a thing. Mariette doesn't immediately say what happened. After a few minutes of looking into her father's face, she adds that she smells a strange odor of blood coming from him. Cullen says nothing in response to Mariette's words and walks past his daughter. Mariette realizes that she had been too blunt, as she thought. Dante distracts Mariette by explaining that the master had a lot to do, and that's why it's like this. She turns around and looks at her father and replies that it's okay. Glancing at the departing Cullen, Mariette notices that her father didn't smell of alcohol today either. Stepping out into the garden, Mariette begins her walk. Seeing a guardian flying by, the girl asks to pay attention to her, for she's under a tree. Kun immediately transforms into cat form and lands next to the girl. Mariette wonders at Kun what he was doing while she slept, since he was gone in the morning. The guardian explains that during that time he decided to make a circle around the empire and the area was really huge. Mariette couldn't believe that Kun had been able to fly all over the empire in one night. The guardian put his paw on the girl's cheek and wondered what had happened to her. Mariette doesn't understand what Kuhn is talking about. The guardian notices that the girl looked sad. Marie, sitting under a tree, explains that she has done a little wrong to her father. Mariette adds that she told her father that he smelled blood. In her opinion, the odor was very strong indeed. The guardian assumed it was the smell of medicinal herbs, which also had a pungent and strong odor. Mariette looks questioningly at the keeper, for she didn't know that herbs could give off such an odor, and maybe then her father is more something and she doesn't know. Mariette begins to speculate that the plot may have changed because she stayed alive. Mariette was even more horrified by this twist because then Cullen is drinking alcohol while sick. At that moment, Cullen was watching his daughter playing with a black cat. The man decides to turn to Dante. Cullen wonders if it's normal for a 6-year-old girl to play alone. Cullen explains that usually Mariette's peers already have friends, and if they are very fast in their development, they even throw tea parties for girls their own age. Dante saw the cat sitting next to him and assumed that Mariette had already met a friend. Dante lowers his head slightly and adds that Cullen has been looking for them for a long time, and it's a great blessing that Mariette stayed alive. Dante suggests his master be a little more affectionate and warm to his daughter. Cullen only coldly called him by his first name. Stepping away from the window, the man added that he was never able to protect anyone. Looking at his hands, Cullen explains that even today, because of the past, he had to take someone's life again. Half the reason was to avenge his Yuri. The other half was to release the anger that had built up inside him. Remembering all the horrors, Cullen begins to assume that Dante is actually right, because as the father of a child who lost his mom, he should have hugged her tightly and warmly. Cullen remembered Mariette's phrase from today that he smelled blood. Cullen blamed himself for not being able to protect her mother and therefore not having the right to do so. At this point, Mariette is still sitting under the tree talking to the guardian. Kuhn tells her that the girl's power is too low for anything. Mariette was shocked that Kuhn had called her power so small. The girl suggested some method of trying to awaken her power. The guardian wonders if she wants to die at her age of 6. The girl needs to get help from the witch, and then she can get rid of the side effects and grow her strength. Mariette was outraged that she had barely found the guardian, and now she had to find a witch as well. Having finished their conversation, Fina eventually came in and invited the girl to dinner, explaining that their master did not wish to dine tonight. After bowing out, Fina apologizes, saying that Mariette will have to eat alone. Mariette gets up from the table, stating that her father didn't even have lunch today. Fina explained that she didn't know because Dante had taken care of lunch himself. Mariette assumed that her father was very angry, and now she needed to do something about it, but she didn't know, because she had never had a father before. Mariette came up with the idea of bringing the food herself and eating with him. The girl asks the cook what Cullen prefers to eat. Lowering his head, the cook explains that their master has no particular preferences and eats only out of necessity and in certain quantities. Mariette could not believe what she heard. She decides to leave the table immediately and go to her father urgently. No one knew what to do in such a situation. Mariette walked up to her father's door, knocking weakly from behind the door. The girl was holding a basket of miscellaneous food, worried that he was hungry. Mariette knocked loudly at her father's door with all her might, but all was in vain. No one gave any sign of life. Mariette assumed that her father was very angry with her or had gone to the bathroom. Realizing she can't get through, she leaves the basket of food by the door. Mariette assumed that if she left the basket by the door, Cullen would know that she'd come to see him. At this moment, Cullen himself was in the bathroom reflecting on recent events. At the master's door, all the servants were bustling about and trying to bring hot water to Cullen. One carried hot water, and others carried cold water at the same moment. None of the maids understood why their master was behaving like this, and he had also moved away from Miss Mariette. After finishing his bath and fighting off the foul odor of the medication, Cullen walks out and out of his room. Clenching his fist, he was willing to allow Mariette to be bothered in any way and suspect him of anything. At this point, Mariette herself was lying depressed in bed. She was having a hard time with her father, for they had not been able to meet all day. The guardian added that she could just go and see him, for he had recently gone to his room. Hearing this, Mariette immediately jumped up and clarified if the keeper was telling the truth. Getting out of bed, she ran to the exit, wanting to check on her father and talk to him. Stepping out into the hallway, Mariette immediately bumps into Dante, clarifying if her father is in his room. Dante, holding the candle, explains that his master is probably in his study at this time. Mariette didn't know he had a study, clarifying exactly where he was. Dante points to a door at the end of the corridor and explains that this is his master's office. Mariette thanks the man for his help. With difficulty, Mariette opens the heavy door and walks into her father's study. Walking around the office, she found it odd that it was so clean, unlike the room. At one point, Marriott notices the strange bottle on her father's desk again. Realizing that there might have been something left in the bottle, Marriott decides to take the bottle out and smell it, then put it away so he doesn't drink it all. Struggling to get the bottle, Marriott nearly drops it in the moment, but luckily the bottle didn't break. Marriott immediately decides to try what is in the bottle, for there was indeed a strange smell of medicinal herbs coming from the bottle. Tasting it with the edge of her tongue, Marriott was shocked at how bitter and unpleasant it was. The black silhouette of an unknown man appeared from behind the girl. Cullen lifted the little intruder by her arms. Marriott screamed in surprise. Realizing it was her father, she turned her attention to him. Cullen wonders why his daughter came into his office. Marriott puffs up her cheeks and decides to pretend that she had nothing to do with it and did absolutely nothing. Cullen checks with his daughter to see if she's okay. Laughing sweetly, Marriott adds that she is fine. Cullen asked again more coldly if Marriott was all right. The girl tensed even more at Cullen's gaze. The man still wouldn't let go of Marriott. Marriott's tongue began to ache more and more from the taste of the medicine. Unable to stand it, she breathed heavily. Cullen put Marriott in one hand and took hold of his forehead, not knowing what to do. Marriott couldn't stand to be in so much pain. Marriott's mouth wouldn't even close, just like after anesthesia at the dentist. Marriott tried to apologize to her father for what she had done. Cullen just stared at the floor in silence, thinking about what he should do. Cullen asks his daughter to stop talking. Marriott apologizes for that, after which the man asks Dante to get Hill, the estate's doctor. The man coming into the room decides to examine Marriott first, offering to move his tongue. Placing the wand on his tongue, Hill decides to examine his mouth and tongue completely. Putting away the medical wand, Hill assures that fortunately there are no big problems with this. The man takes out his notebook and decides to prescribe the right medicine. Descartes Hilla-Redion was the attending physician for the entire estate. Hill decides to ask Cullen if Marriott drank the whole bottle, to which the man replies in the affirmative. Marriott resented in her mind that she had only touched her tongue. Hill explained to Marriott that she was too small for this and would be uncomfortable for the next week. Marriott couldn't believe what she was hearing, because she couldn't keep quiet. All the servants could hardly contain their laughter as Marriott tried to get the words out with her swollen tongue. Marriott demanded that no one laugh. Fina jerked slightly, barely containing her laughter, apologizing, wanting to leave the room. Marriott couldn't stand the fact that everyone was laughing all the way to the end at her. Eventually, everyone has left the room except Cullen. Marriott wonders why her father is not going to his room. The man demands that his daughter go to bed. Marriott settled into bed, thinking that in all likelihood her father would continue to stand like this until he fell asleep. Marriott closed her eyes through the force, but she was still worried about why her father was standing over her soul like that. The next day, Marriott woke up, and the first thing she did was try to speak. Unfortunately, her tongue was still numb. It pissed Marriott off that she was talking like an infant. The keeper also ran into the room, and he immediately asked why Marriott had drunk a decoction of herbs with a paralytic effect. Moving closer, the keeper reminds her that he had previously warned the girl that already his scent makes her nose ache, and the child's psyche all the more unable to tolerate the potion. The guardian pointed out that Marriott's body was too small, and that's why it reacted that way right away. Kuhn recalls that one of the witches used to make such potions and sell them earlier, adding that such potions are drunk by those in severe mental pain. Marriott was saddened to realize why her father was taking the drug in the first place. Suddenly, Marriott realizes what Kuhn is getting at and asks if the guardian is sure he just said the witch. The guardian nods his head. Marriott noticed that Hill had made an antidote to the witch's potion. The girl thought Hill was a strange man. The guardian adds that he was scouting the neighborhood of the house last night to learn something useful to the landlady. At one point, being a raven, the keeper discovered a strange item near the estate. Marriott resents that Kuhn is only now telling her about it. The guardian says with a smile that he only just remembered about it. The guardian assumed it wasn't really dangerous, but still, to keep it out of the way, Kuhn tossed this pebble over the wall. Marriott thanks Kuhn when she hears this, but asks him to show her next time as well. Marriott found many things strange about the estate. Marriott planned to find out more about who Hill really was in the near future. Marriott jumps off the bed abruptly, adding that she'll be back soon. The guardian adds that he didn't doubt it. Marriott opened the door behind which stood a huge man in a gray uniform. The man looked down and assured Marriott that she was not allowed to leave the room at the moment. Mariette was very frightened at the sight of the huge stranger. The girl wondered who the man was, for he was quite intimidating. The man stood nonchalantly in the aisle, preventing Mariette from passing into the hallway. Mariette also notices the sword the guard held in his right hand. The man explained to little Mariette that she was not allowed to leave the room until she was cured. Mariette was devastated by the news. Mariette immediately becomes indignant, wanting to leave the room. The man adds that this is an order from his master. After the potion incident, Cullen forbade Mariette to leave the room for the next week. To get out of the room, Mariette tried to placate the maids, but the huge guard standing at the door was adamant with the Lord's decision. Mariette described the Budo man as an impregnable wall, standing like a giant with a sword. Mariette lived like this for the next week, after which the ban on leaving the room was lifted. One day, Dante introduced a man as Miss Mariette's protector named Aaron Torben. Mariette was stunned by such news. Mariette assures Dante that she's doing fine on her own. Dante explains with a smile that it will be strange at first, but she will get used to it in time. Mariette knew she needed to awaken her powers soon and find out why Hilla knew how to make medicine, but the night was severely limiting her range of action. Mariette realized that her father would not relent, and the guard would be with her forever. The man decides to introduce himself in person and asks to be called simply Aaron, then extends his hand. A man assures Miss Mariette that he is prepared to protect her at the cost of his life. Mariette placed her small hand on top, marveling at how huge the man's hands were, assuming that was why he carried such a huge sword. Mariette also recalled that her father also had large hands, but in all the time she never once held his hand. With a smile, Mariette called Aaron's hand very large. The man stood slightly stunned at Mrs. words. Mariette decides to call it a day and go about her business. Aaron wonders where the girl plans to go. Mariette explains that she wanted to meet with Hilla, in her mind adding that she wanted to thank her and get a prescription for the medicine at the same time. Aaron assumed that Mariette was talking about the doctor with green hair, adding that he'd seen him going somewhere on the first floor. Mariette realized she couldn't catch up with him in time. Mariette asks for Aaron's help, for they really need to go to him soon. Aaron only smiled in response. After leaving the room, Mariette meets Fina. The girl learns that the girl is looking for Mr. Hull and informs him that he left in the morning with his bag of medical instruments. Fina is curious why Mariette is wondering where Hill has gone. Mariette lowers her head and explains that she only wanted to thank him for his help. Fina was very touched that Mariette wanted to thank Hill so much. Mariette thanks Fina for her help. Mariette also clarifies where her father has gone. With a smirk, Fina immediately tells him that the gentleman has no urgent business outside the estate today and will be working in his office. Fina added excitedly that Mariette would be able to dine with her master this evening. Mariette was equally surprised by this news. Mariette was glad that she would be able to eat all the goodies with her father at dinner. In her heart, she was sad that she couldn't meet Hill. Mariette adds with a smile on her face that he will play then, so that by evening he will be very hungry and eat a lot. Fina decides to prepare a separate dessert for the girl for the evening. Out in the garden of the manor, Mariette decides to call Kun and talk to him while she has a moment. Kun comes out of the bushes and asks where the girl's guards have disappeared to. Mariette says that he has nothing to worry about because she has managed to get rid of him. A minute earlier, Mariette had informed everyone that she was going to the garden to play alone. Aaron and Fina kindly let the girl go. Mariette notices a few leaves in the keeper's teeth and wonders what exactly the keeper was holding. Dropping the leaves to the ground, the keeper assured her that they were very precious and she should try them. Mariette thought it odd that the keeper was suggesting that she try some leaves, for they even smelled unusual. The guardian assures her that these herbs can raise the level of her abilities, and it will help to awaken the girl's powers. Mariette reluctantly took one leaf in her hands. Hearing of the level up and awakening, without hesitation, Mariette shoves one leaf into her mouth. After a second, unable to stand it, Mariette wrenches the whole thing back. The guardian was slightly surprised, for it was a fairly valuable herb, not easy to find. Wiping her face, Mariette wondered how she even got to eat those leaves. Suddenly, behind the keeper, Mariette notices a strange glow resembling bright lights. Mariette wondered what those lights were surrounding her. Realizing that it can't stop there, Mariette takes another leaf and begins to chew it vigorously. The guardian didn't fully understand what kind of lights the girl was talking about. Mariette explains that she saw very bright lights, assuming she could see the magic of nature. Pulling away, Mariette added that after being twisted a second time, the lights disappeared completely. Stretching, the keeper found it entertaining, for even he saw no lights. Marriott was slightly saddened that after all the suffering she had lost this skill. In her head, Marriott continued to speculate that it might be nature magic, and the lights didn't seem quite ordinary to her, for they resembled the silhouette of a human being. Marriott decides to be more careful and take her time so as not to lose any more skills. Kuhn adds that he will continue to bring medicinal herbs, as they were very useful and will also help develop strength. Marriott was not happy about what she heard. Marith decides to ask if it's still worth eating the herb. The guardian smirked, wondering if the girl really thought that once would be enough. The guardian explained that it would take more than 100 times of eating such leaves to awaken the witch in her. Marriott was utterly mortified by what she had heard. It was evening of the same day. Marriott returned to the manor and cleaned herself up, and came to the hall to sit at the table. Marriott was surprised that her father actually came to the table and ate with her. Marriott notes with a smile that there is indeed a lot of different food on the table. The cook decides to add that he has decided to cook more different dishes on Marriott's recovery. Marriott thanks the cook for his concern. Marriott, not knowing where to start, rushes off to find the most delicious things. At this point, Cullen decides to ask his daughter if she needs friends. Marriott paused, interjecting to ask which friends her father was referring to. Lowering her head slightly, Marriott realizes that she really didn't have any friends in her new life. Marriott realizes that if she makes friends and they find out she's a witch, it won't be much good, and so she immediately turns down the offer. Cullen decides to offer to get his daughter an animal, but Marriott also refuses. Cullen ends there, adding that Marriott should not eat everything. Marriott was shocked that her father found out that she had eaten those very leaves. Marriott begins to assume that her father isn't so much worried about her as he doesn't want her to cause unnecessary trouble, and after all, Marriott was trying for him. Cullen asks his daughter to answer. Marriott only coldly replied, "Okay." Marriott was not happy with her father's behavior because he treated her like a puppy. Marriott realized that pushing her so hard would only make her disobedient. Marriott casually wondered if Dante would be having dinner as well. The man was slightly shocked by such a question. Dante assures her that he's eating just fine and Marriott shouldn't worry. Marriott turned away and puffed out her cheeks in displeasure. At that moment, Cullen glared at Dante, which made him laugh incredulously. Marriott decides to formally tell her father to eat to his health. Cullen asks to address him freely. Marriott was slightly surprised by this. Cullen added that his daughter could address him however she pleased. Marriott didn't understand what had happened to her father, but she suddenly liked him a lot. Cullen continued to eat his steak nonchalantly. Marriott seemed to feel as if he was able to comfort a child who wasn't eating well and made him eat his food. Smiling, Marriott realized that little by little she would grow closer to her father, and their relationship would improve. Marriott smiled at her father as well, thanking him. Marriott really wanted to make their relationship like Yuri's. There had been some recent changes in the Duchy of Descartes. The stifling silence of the manor has been replaced by the laughter and joy of the servants. It didn't take long for the cold house to become much warmer, and it all happened after the little mistress came to the estate. Watching everything from the sidelines, Dante began to think that perhaps Miss Marriott is a very strong personality. Dante didn't know how to explain the fact that a girl could reach out so amicably to a father she should hate. Marriott decides to find out what kind of food her father likes. Dante wondered what exactly could have made the girl so strong. Unable to imagine, Dante could only stare. Unable to imagine if she kept a huge wound in her soul without telling anyone about it. Cullen continues to eat his steak and declares that he doesn't have a favorite dish. Marriott can't believe it. Marriott tells me right off the bat that her favorite things to eat are cookies and candy and chocolate cake. Marriott adds that if there are strawberries on top, she likes it even better. All the servants were delighted with little Marriott. Noticing the gentleman's face, everyone was greatly surprised at the way he was acting. Cullen continued to eat his steak, and an imperceptible smile appeared on his face. Marriott also noticed that her father was really starting to change. After that day, when it came to desserts, Cullen pictured chocolate cake with strawberries, as if he'd grown to love that dish too. At this point in the sanctuary, one of the acolytes decides to report his observations. The man had already been notified and knew that the radar stone for finding witches was missing. The servant who came in bows out, adding that it was the one he wanted to tell you about. The acolyte declares that a radar stone set up on the Duchy of Descartes in one day ended up in the border area at Hamville. The man also added that he decided to look around the neighborhood for signs of the witch, but could not find anything. Priest Rudel found this very entertaining, and with a snide smile, he thanked Raphael's acolyte. Rudel notes that if the radar stone finds a witch, it will immediately seal her magic. Since such a stone was moved in one day so far away, the power of a very powerful witch may have been harnessed. The man offers to capture her and use her as an offering for their shrine. The man was also strange that the stone was found specifically near the border area. Hamville is a country that used all varieties of powers, including witchcraft, and if a witch crossed the border, they couldn't hunt her. Rudel, continuing to smirk, began to consider what they should do next. That same night, Mariette had a terrifying dream where she was sealed under a layer of glass with no way to get out. All the servants in the neighborhood bustled about but paid no attention to her. Mariette tried her best to call for help, but all was even. Suddenly, Mariette woke up in a heavy sweat. It had all been a terrifying dream. Mariette jumped up sharply, Fina smiling at the fact that the girl shouldn't sleep so long on an empty stomach. When Mariette looked around and came to her senses, she sighed easily. Mariette started talking like a little kid again, which made her panic a lot. Fina asks Mariette to drink some warm water. Mariette was glad that everything was back to normal again. Fina began brushing Miss Mariette's hair vigorously. Fina looks in the mirror and brushes Mariette's hair, adding that she will still let Dr. Hill know when he returns. Mariette immediately refuses to take her medication. Mariette in a moment begins to notice that all the clothes her mother has sewn have become too small for her. Mariette also noted that it's been quite some time since she broke the plot of the original novel and survived. Mariette knew that still the main plotline hadn't changed, and the shrine was still obsessively trying to possess Cullen. It was written in the novel that they would constantly hang around the Duke, and as soon as they had the opportunity and Cullen committed a sin, they would immediately try to recruit him to the sanctuary. Mariette realized that if this was the way things were going to go, it would eventually lead to disaster. The first thing Mariette instructed Kuhn to do was to peek around to see if there was anything dangerous in the vicinity of the mansion. Sitting at the mirror, Fina silently brushed the girl's hair as she always did. Mariette never left wondering why the sanctuary was so eager to get Cullen, since the Emperor was already under their control. Mariette clenched her fists. She didn't want to sit idly by, she had to do something about it. Mariette waits until Fina is finished and announces that she is going to play outside next. Fina offers to escort the girl and be present with her. Mariette refuses with a smile, reminding her that Aaron will be by her side. In the shower, Mariette apologized to Fina. It was hard for her to act, and with only one following her. Aaron came in at that moment, wondering if the girl had slept well. Mariette didn't immediately realize it was Aaron. The man stepped closer and took a knee before greeting the girl. Mariette, admiring Aaron, calls him a knight from the pages of a fairy tale. The man is amused by this statement, playing along with the little girl and calling Mariette a princess from a fairy tale. Mariette decides to ask Aaron to help her, namely to climb somewhere higher. The man immediately understood what the girl wanted to say. Aaron came closer and gently lifted Mariette up, taking her in his arms. Mariette was delighted. It seemed really tall to her, and she realized why many children like to be held. Mariette decides to look around the room. Aaron at this point wonders if it is high enough for a girl. Mariette tries to explain that she needs to climb even higher to see the forest. Aaron decides to carry Mariette to the highest tower on the estate. Mariette was delighted by the scale. Lowering Mariette down to the ground, Aaron explains that if they are attacked by enemies, this is where they will be able to see it from. Mariette continued to marvel at the height, comparing it to becoming a giant. Mariette excitedly begins to tell how her mother used to read books that depicted giants as big, strong, and kind people. Aaron assumes that the girl means giants. Mariette confirms Aaron's words. The man explains that his mom was a descendant of giants, because of which he is half giant as well. With a smile, the man adds that this secret is to be trusted to Mariette. The girl looked at the man in admiration, amazed at what she had heard. Mariette had already heard that the giants disappeared before the shrine gained power. The girl adds with a smile that she will keep Aaron's secret. Aaron puts his hand on his chest and adds that Mariette doesn't have to keep his secret because he will have to protect her at the cost of his life anyway. Mariette was outraged that Aaron was stating such terrible things. The girl began waving her arms furiously. Laughing, Aaron begins to move Mariette a little at a time towards the exit. Mariette covers her ears and declares that she refuses to listen to this and will pretend that she didn't hear any of this. Aaron decides to explain his words, namely that he wanted to show how much he valued Mariette's life. Mariette calms down afterwards. After calming down, Mariette decides to think it over carefully, because in the original story it was written that if a descendant of giants gets the relic of an ancient giant, he will gain a powerful force, and Aaron was a descendant of a giant. Mariette holds out her little finger to Aaron, asking him to promise that he will protect her at all costs. Giving his huge finger, Aaron promises that he will protect the girl for the rest of her life. Mariette suggests that the man may become a very big force for her in the future. Suddenly, Mariette hears the keeper's voice, Kuhn wondering what the girl is doing at the moment. Flying as a raven, the keeper reports that there is nothing dangerous in the vicinity, suggesting flying up to Mariette. The girl mentally informs that the keeper can't be helped as long as Aaron was around. Finished looking at the forest, Mariette playfully asks to be let go to play downstairs. Aaron agrees, offering to guide the girl. Mariette points into the distance and asks to walk to the garden, which looks like a small forest. Out in the garden, Mariette was glad that Aaron was letting her walk freely, only watching her from afar. Sitting down near the tree, Mariette called out to Kuhn and wondered if he had brought more leaves. The girl did not want to eat them. The guardian reminds her that it is good for her and that she should eat more often. Taking all the leaves, Mariette chews the bitter leaves with all her might. The guardian is sitting beside her, cheering her up as best he can. Finished with the leaves, Mariette pulls out a candy and takes a bite of the bitter flavor. The girl asks Kuhn if there is a way to get Hill on their side. The guardian suggests that the man has a bad temper. Mariette explains to Kuhn that having someone who knows a lot about herbs around will be very helpful. Mariette also wanted to ask him to lower the dosage of the paralytic drug for her father. Mariette clarifies whether emotions are dulled by high dosages. The girl was amazed that her father could even drink such a dangerous drug in large doses. Mariette suddenly begins to speculate that Hilla might actually be a witch. Kuhn immediately stops the girl by saying that there are no male witches. Kuhn added that if Hill had good skills in herbal medicine, it was because there were witches in his family. The guardian added that regular people also do potions, but it's less effective, and if he was a witch's assistant, the guy could learn a lot from her. Kuhn thinks, based on hair color, that Hilla could be from the Hasht or Dima families. Mariette didn't understand how a guardian could guess which family based on hair color alone. Kuhn asks whose hair color Mariette looks like. The girl immediately replies that it's her mom's. Kuhn draws a parallel and shows by this that the witch's blood is stronger than the girl thinks. Mariette is amazed that the guardian thought of this. Mariette, excited, suggests to Kuhn that he find a potions witch among the two families. The guardian asks to use both families. Kuhn adds that both families are good with herbs and their abilities are so perfect and similar that they are rivals. Mariette is a little downcast and asks what she should do in that case. Kuhn asks her to trust her intuition and choose one of them. Mariette worries that she might make a mistake, not knowing what she should do then. Kuhn explains that even if she is shabbed, they'll know right away which Hilla family she doesn't belong to, and that's a good thing too. In her mind, Mariette didn't know where she should start, so she wanted Kuhn to help with everything. Mariette falls to the ground in helplessness and tells Kuhn that she'll just stick it to Hill and become a nuisance to him. The guardian, stretching in cat form, says it's the first time he's seen a witch like Mariette. Mariette doesn't understand why Kuhn said that. The guardian explains that many of the witches don't like to ask for help from anyone and try to become stronger on their own. Mariette realized that she still didn't know what her power was, for all her knowledge came from the plot of the novel. So the more she learned from Kuhn, the more distant she felt from the witches. Mariette changed her face to a sad one and lowered her head slightly. Kuhn notices it at once. Kuhn reminds Mariette that she is still small and will get stronger with time, and she is clearly smarter than her peers. After these words, Mariette jumped up with her arms raised, the girl saying that she would soon grow up and become an adult, in addition to gaining that very power. Kuhn recalls that Mariette also received a promise from the giant that he would always protect her. Mariette was amazed that Kuhn had already found out about it. The guardian explains that he was just flying nearby when the giant swore his loyalty to her. Suddenly, the same Hilla passes among the bushes, which Mariette and Kuhn immediately notice. At this point, Cullen is practicing his speech, namely the announcement that he will declare Mariette as his official heir at the next vassals' meeting. Dante, who was in the room, was overjoyed at the master's decision. Dante had been trying hard to hear those words all this time. The man brought Cullen the gifts Mariette had left, and he asked him to work more often at the manor, and much more. Dante was indeed happy at the Tahil words, for all his hard work had been justified. The vassals of the Descartes family have high self-esteem and are very proud. Because of their views, they did not recognize Lady Yuri because she was the daughter of a simple baron, and as soon as they heard that the lady was missing, they began to shove their children for adoption to the Duke. Dante excitedly added that since Mariette was back, it would be a natural process, remembering that many were trying to do something about it at this point, particularly Viscount Rohel. Dante notices that the gentleman is not happy about something. Cullen wonders if the man has found a point of contact. Dante adds that if his master is about something to do with the shrine, they are still following up on it. Dante thought it was amazing, because when they had been trying to find clues for several years, going through the whole territory of the Empire, there was not a single hint, and at this moment, everything like a fog covering the eye dissipated, showing traces. Dante also found it odd that the direction of the shrine and Mrs. Yuri were in the same direction, noting that Cullen's assumption was most likely correct. Cullen, remembering Mariette's words, begins to be convinced of his hunch. The man was 100% sure of it. Cullen had been looking for them for a very long time indeed, scouring the entire empire like a madman, unable to find them. Cullen realized that the child Yuri had left behind at this point still knew nothing and so would definitely follow him. Cullen was afraid that in time Mariette might find out everything and then she might hate him. Cullen's goal was to leave Mariette everything he owned and protect it at all costs, so that the girl could stand firmly on her own 2 feet. Excusing himself, Dante adds that if he receives any new information, he will report to the master at once. Cullen read the note from the table and crumpled it sharply in his hand. The man recognized that the letter was from the shrine and it wished to visit them soon. Cullen coldly demands that Dante refuse them. The man realized that since they hadn't called, but had decided to come on their own, it meant the sanctuary wanted to test Mariette's essence. Placing his hand on his chest, Dante declares that he will be sure to relay the Lord's response. Dante also reminds him with a smile that the prince's birthday is coming up and the Lord can officially announce Miss. Dante reminded her that there would be many children Mariette's age in the capital and she could socialize. Cullen only glanced coldly at Dante, saying nothing. Dante, realizing what he'd said, added that that was exactly what he would have thought if he'd been out of his mind, asking him to forget everything. Cullen folded his arms and looked out the window, asking him to find someone from the Dilton family. Dante hears about the Dilton family and begins to realize what his master is up to. Dante remembered that only 5 years ago, the Lord had given a similar order to find Mrs. Yuri's real family, and because Mrs. Yuri was missing, the case had been put on hold. Dante smilingly and without further ado agrees to do his master's bidding. The next day, Aaron accompanied Mariette through the estate as he always did. Mariette was saddened that she had missed Hill after all. Mariette, as soon as she saw Hill, immediately tried to catch up with him quickly. Hill paced without noticing little Mariette, because of which, when the girl was distracted, she immediately lost sight of the man. Mariette looked around for a while longer and couldn't figure out exactly where Hill had gone. Even Kuhn couldn't keep track of the man. At the mansion, Mariette greeted Dante. The man, along with Cullen, was headed somewhere. Aaron immediately put Mariette down. The girl instantly greeted her father and headed towards him. Cullen, as always, only coldly replied, unable to show a gram of emotion. Although Mariette was outwardly happy and friendly, but in her heart she was furious at such a cold response from her dad. Mariette took her father by the sleeve and anxiously inquired if Cullen had been drinking bad medicine, suggesting that he might be sick from it. Smiling slightly, Cullen placed his hand on his daughter's head, adding that he didn't drink the medicine. When Mariette saw her father smile, she was truly amazed and could hardly believe what she saw. The girl assumed that because he had stopped taking the medicine, his emotions were returning to him. Mariette enthusiastically began to encourage her Otha, calling him a good boy. Dante pulled out a handkerchief and wiped his tears, apologizing for it, because he was really touched and unable to hold back. Mariette jumped again at Aaron, saying goodbye to her father, for she wanted to spend some more time outside. Cullen nodded in response. Mariette climbed higher on Aaron, was glad to be so high up. The girl thanked the man for his help. Cullen, hearing Mariette calling Aaron the best, shakes him slightly. Mariette, unsuspecting, says goodbye to her father. Walking back out into the garden, Mariette bragged that she had managed to find their meeting place completely covered by trees. Kuhn also noted that the place was indeed nice and protected from prying eyes. Mariette said that she discovered the place by accident when she was chasing Hill, adding that if they would meet at that location, they could discover Hill as well. Mariette considered this place great also for future magic training, wanting to start developing her magical powers. The guardian was pleased with this sentiment, noting that he had just grabbed quite a few medicinal herbs. Mariette was not happy about eating herbs again, so the keeper began to do some special training, Meditation after practicing hand strokes and again eating medicinal leaves. Completely exhausted, Mariette offered to let the keeper finish for today. Kuhn gladly agreed. Struggling to get up from the grass, Mariette was too weak from the intense training. Kuhn immediately asked Mariette to be more careful. Suddenly, the girl's foot stumbles and she starts to fall sharply. Falling to the grass, Mariette was badly frightened. Examining herself, the girl began to fray her dress. Somewhere from the depths of the garden, Mariette suddenly hears a strange cry. The girl could not understand where it was coming from. Upon looking around, Mariette also realizes that he has lost Kuhn and is all alone. Walking forward a bit, Mariette observes an unknown boy crying near a bush. Moving closer, Mariette wondered to the one why he was alone and crying. The boy, sensing the danger, immediately moved away from the perplexed Mariette, wondering who she was. Seeing the bright golden eyes, Mariette was delighted, for he resembled a wood elf, assuming that was what they might look like. The boy immediately demands that Mariette not go near him, for he was a monster. Mariette sat a little farther away with a smile and asked if she could ask with him, but from a distance. Looking away embarrassed, the boy allowed Mariette to stay with him. Mariette couldn't stop admiring the boy's looks and sweet voice. Mariette points to the mansion behind them and explains that that is where she lives. The boy decides to say that he lives in the palace. Mariette heard this and immediately asked what kind of palace it was. The boy, still embarrassed, calls the palace ordinary. Taking out her handkerchief, Mariette holds it out to the boy to wipe away his tears. The boy immediately refuses to do so. The boy demanded that Mariette not touch him, for he was a dangerous monster. In her thoughts, Mariette didn't understand how exactly the boy was able to enter the territory. After all, it was her father's domain. Plus, she doubted he was a monster. Mariette continued to associate the boy with the little wood elf who had a face like a puppy that had lost its home. Mariette also remembered her mother reading tales of elves and spirits when she was a child, assuming that such tales probably didn't come from nothing in this world. Mariette mentally convinces herself that the boy is a wood elf, and if she can help him return to where he originally was, she expects to receive a gift or reward. With a smile, Mariette repeatedly calls the boy an elf, asking if he lives in this forest. The boy stops Mariette by saying that he is not an elf and should not be touched. Mariette decides to throw the handkerchief in the boy's direction, wanting to help him but not touch him as he asked. The boy was surprised by this kindness. Mariette adds that she gives it so the boy won't be sad, showing that she has quite a few handkerchiefs. The boy carefully takes a handkerchief and wipes his tears. At this point, Mariette jumps closer to the boy and takes his hand, something the boy completely didn't expect. Mariette laughingly says it's okay and she will keep the fact that she touched him a secret. Mariette also decides to reveal that she is a witch, calling herself a monster. The boy doesn't believe Mariette's words, to which she calls the latter a liar as well. Mariette, moving closer, introduces herself, wondering what the other one's name is. The boy introduces himself by the name of Armin. Mariette was amazed at how shy the boy was, continuing to convince himself that he was an elf. Mariette calls Armin's name beautiful and extraordinary. The boy was surprised, as if no one had ever said that to him before. Mariette confirms that she likes the name Armin, wondering if she can call him by his first name. Armin only nods silently in response. Mariette decides to immediately ask Armin why he was alone in the forest. The boy looks away embarrassed. Armin lifts up his sleeve, revealing a small abrasion. The boy explains that he is lost, and when he wants to run away, he accidentally ends up in this place. Armin also reveals that when he runs away, his mentor swears at him. Mariette, not understanding anything, assumes that the man has merely lost his way back. Mariette looks at Armin, wondering who his mentor was. Lowering his head, Armin adds that his mentor was Hilla Redian. Mariette loudly decides to ask again if Hilla is the green-haired man with glasses. Armin confirms fearfully. Mariette still clarifies if Hilla helped get to this place. Armin struggles to move away from Mariette because of the strong proximity. He tells her about the object his mentor gave him. Mariette begins to realize that it was with the help of Hilla's object that Armin got into the garden. Armin suddenly calms down, informing her that he urgently needs to go. Mariette doesn't understand why the boy is in such a hurry. Armin tearfully says he has to go and forcefully again. Mariette takes Armin's hand and asks if he is all right. The boy only wonders if he can come to the garden again. Mariette, worried about Armin, immediately allows it, suggesting that they meet every day and spend every day together. Armin stammered slightly, which made Mariette think that he didn't want to see her further. The boy immediately tries to explain that that is not what he meant. Mariette notices that Armin is repeating her actions. With a smile, she decides to offer her own option. Since Mariette was an adult in her previous life, she decides to take the initiative. Mariette offers the option that if Armin does not cry, she will come next time. Armin smilingly agrees to Mariette's proposal. Suddenly, golden spheres appeared everywhere. Mariette was slightly startled that Armin was slowly starting to disappear. Armin slowly begins to fade away, one last attempt to say something to Mariette. Suddenly, Armin just disappears, as if he never existed. The boy doesn't have time to finish his sentence, stopping only at Mariette's name. Mariette, sitting in the bushes, begins to reflect that Hilla could hardly accept a wood elf as an apprentice. At that moment, the guardian also comes out from behind the tree, addressing the girl. The guardian reports that Mariette suddenly disappeared, causing him to be very frightened. He also reports that the aura in the area was strange. Mariette reports that she spoke to a child who looked like an elf. The guardian interjects, whether the child looks like an elf. Mariette nods approvingly, describing his golden hair, introducing him as Armin. The guardian reports that he didn't see it, also adding how Mariette suddenly disappeared. Kuhn suggests that it is all due to the aura of ancient power that is present in the place. Mariette suggests in her mind that even though Kuhn sensed magic or a force of nature, it is impossible. Mariette remembers Armin talking about the strange object. Mariette puts her hands behind her head and begins to contemplate that the power to help you hide in a flash is very handy. Suddenly, Kuhn frantically points to the girl's hand, informing her that it's missing. Mariette also notices that her hand is actually missing somewhere. Mariette and Kuhn make a decision to scrutinize the place. They manage to find out that it was a hiding space. Mariette realized that it was magic and the place was connected to the item Armin was talking about. Mariette was interested in solving the mystery. The girl asks the curator if the witch's object can be used by an ordinary person. Kuhn explains that if someone gets permission from the witch, they can use the object. Mariette begins to guess everything. Kuhn hears the maids and suggests that they should go because they are all looking for the girl. Upon reaching the mansion, Mariette's stomach rumbled violently with hunger. Kuhn turned to the girl and was surprised by the sound. Mariette was very hungry because of all these events. It was approaching lunchtime, which pleased the girl. As they walk up the stairs, Mariette notices her father and Dante discussing something. Mariette decides to ask her father to have lunch with her this time. Dante, with a leaf in his hand, was discussing what appeared to be something serious. Mariette goes to the window and realizes she can't reach it. It was too high. Mariette starts jumping furiously, trying to reach the window. At that moment, Kuhn comes in and provides a plank to make it easier for the girl to reach the window. Standing up on the plank, Mariette shouted loudly out the window, to which Dante and Cullen immediately noticed. Turning around, Cullen notices someone's hands waving at the ocean. Dante wondered how Mariette had ended up at the window. Dante opened the window and greeted Mariette. The girl asked where her father was. Cullen was surprised at such a question, wondering what Mariette was doing at the window. Mariette smiles at her father and explains that she came to see her dad. Folding his arms and walking over to the window, Cullen added that she could have approached it from inside. A small smile was visible on the man's face. Mariette noticed it as well. Mariette explains that she wanted to really see Cullen, so she went to the window. Mariette suggests that her father have lunch with her. Cullen hears this and suggests that his daughter go inside as soon as possible. Mariette asks again if her father will eat with her. Cullen briefly says yes. Mariette immediately asks her dad to wait while she walks toward him. Jumping off the plank, Mariette asks Kuhn to wait while she has lunch. Mariette starts running towards her father's office. She wanted to hurry before her father changed his mind. The girl really wanted to try her best to get his emotions back again. Mariette notices Cullen and Dante standing at the entrance, assuming the two have decided to meet her. Suddenly, Mariette stumbles again and begins to fall face forward. There was a crash and Mariette was on the ground. Dante is startled by this. Mariette was really sick, her body still reeling from the last fall. Suddenly, some force lifts Mariette to her feet, something the girl did not expect at all. Cullen immediately picked up his daughter. Mariette was thrilled that her father was beginning to care for her. Mariette suddenly says she's in pain. Dante notices that the girl's knees were skinned from the last fall. Dante immediately rushes to the mansion to fetch ointment for the wounds. Cullen holds her daughter's hand and glares at the man. Mariette didn't know what to do, assuming that if she moved, it would hurt even more. Mariette realized that if Aaron had been there, he would have carried her in his arms. Suddenly, Cullen easily takes Mariette in his arms. The girl was amazed, not believing that her father could do this. Mariette couldn't believe that Cullen had taken her in his arms so properly, too. Mariette smiles at her father, adding that she loves him very much. Cullen only looks at his daughter in silence. Upon entering the mansion, Fina immediately runs up to Cullen walking with Mariette. The girl immediately decides to help give aid to the girl. Mariette explains that she just fell. When they heard that Miss Mariette had hurt herself, all the maids came running to help Mr. and Miss. At that moment, Dante himself returned with a box of first aid. Mariette didn't understand why everyone was making such a fuss, since her skin had only peeled a little and her finger was bleeding. Sitting on the couch, Mariette wonders if the medicine will hurt. Dante smilingly assures her that it will only sting a little at first. Dante pulls out a strange purple-colored ointment, explaining that it was still a medicine worth applying for the infection. Mariette was a little confused by the strange color of the usual ointment. Dante takes a handful of ointment with his fingers, adding that after he applies it, Miss won't even have a scar. Mariette is even more tense that the man is going to ointment so much. Mariette took her father's hand and decided to ask Fina to be the one to anoint her leg. Mariette assumed that if the man continued, he would definitely hurt her. Dante, through tears, begs to still be given a chance to do this and help. Mariette was uncooperative and insisted that it was Fina who did it. Moments later, Fina easily applied the ointment to Mariette's feet without any trouble or pain. Mariette adds that she only feels a slight chill afterwards. Fina explains that this effect will soon pass and that she will anoint and bandage it again at night. Mariette grinned, glad she was lucky she wasn't in pain. At that moment, all the servants, including Dante, couldn't take their eyes off how sweetly Mariette was holding her master's hand. Mariette didn't notice how she automatically took her father's hand. Mariette notices that the finger she has been holding on to all this time is red. The girl apologizes to her father for squeezing her hand too hard. Cullen asks his daughter not to worry, then reaches out to Mariette again. Taking his daughter in his arms, Cullen offers to go with him and have lunch. Mariette couldn't take her eyes off her father. When Mariette arrived at the banquet hall, she was impressed when she saw the cooked fish. The girl immediately fell in love with the dish. The chef says with a smile that he had previously thought Mariette liked whitefish meat a lot, because of which he decided to try cooking something new for them. The man decided to describe in detail how he had prepared the dish, adding that it was slightly spicy and best eaten with a bit of butter rather than mustard sauce. Mariette was pleased with the dish and loudly thanked the chef for his care. The cook also thanks the girl, explaining that he was able to remember his youth and start to relearn forgotten recipes. Cullen asks Mariette to start eating. The girl wishes her father a pleasant appetite. Cullen said quietly in reply, also a pleasant appetite. Though Mariette didn't seem to mind, she could hear her father beginning to mend his ways. The cook hoped his master would like the new dishes. While Cullen and Mariette were having lunch, the man decides to inform his daughter that he plans to declare her his heir before the vassals. Mariette is a little shaken by this news. Mariette didn't quite understand why she was in such a hurry, since she had come to see him not so long ago. She wondered aloud if that was a good thing. Continuing to cut the fish, Cullen adds that in other words, his daughter will officially become Mariette Descartes. Mariette put down her glass and sank into thought. Every time her clothes became a size smaller, Mariette felt that all the things that reminded her of her mother became dim and dusky. Mariette's biggest fear was that she would have to wear new clothes, and in time the old memories would be replaced by others, and if that happened, Mariette would completely forget the time she had spent with her mother. Mariette didn't want the trace of Yuri to disappear even from her name, so she calls herself Mariette Dilton. Hearing this, Cullen only silently continued eating. After that, the man did not say a word. Mariette also did not say anything and continued eating. It seemed to Mariette that lunchtime lasted an eternity from the sepulchral silence. But the same night Fina came to Mariette, the girl learns that her father has proposed to give the name Mariette Dilton Descartes. Fina confirms the girl's words with a smile, adding that the Lord has considered Mariette's words and listened to them. Mariette reflects on what her father has done for her. At this point, Fina decides to remind her that the girl's sleeves have gotten too short. Mariette was afraid that she would have to get rid of the dress, so she began to refuse and said that she was very comfortable. Fina takes a closer look at the dress with Mariette's permission. Taking out a black ribbon, Fina suggests sewing it on the sleeves to make them appear longer so Mariette can wear her dress longer and it won't get damaged. Fina, showing a black ribbon, clarifies whether the girl likes the color and whether it will go with the dress. Also with a smile, Fina adds that Yuri had a real talent for embroidery and she won't achieve such skill. Mariette felt a little sad, for she thought Fina only wanted to throw away her dress because of what the girl was trying to hide from her. Fina sees Mariette's sad face and apologizes, assuming it's because the girl didn't want to repair her clothes. Mariette stops Fina and asks her to do as she wishes. Mariette gently places her hand on top of Fina's, adding that she doesn't mind. Mariette really wanted to wear her dresses inherited from her mother a little longer. Fina, encouraged by Mariette's words, agrees to help her and try to sew so that no stitches are visible. Smiling back at Fina, Mariette hoped her mom was watching her grow up from heaven as well. Mariette was surprised at how Fina handled the embroidery. The girl explains that this is the first time she has done it this way because before she just knew how to cut and sew in the simplest way possible. Mariette thanks Fina for her help, noting that the dress is even more beautiful. Fina also thanks the girl for helping her in sewing such a lovely dress. While trying on her dress, Mariette decides to ask Fina if she knew her mother before. Fina explains with a smile that she was unfortunately unable to serve her, but knew the woman well. Fina had previously seen Yuri when she first came to the estate. The girl describes the mistress as a very beautiful and kind woman. In her thoughts, Mariette noticed the similarity to the original novel. The girl added that her mother was indeed very beautiful, specifying whether she had always been like that. Fina admired Yuri's beauty, and what a bright soul the woman had. Mariette had previously thought she had to protect her memories of her mother from other people, but she was surprised that other people also protected her mother's memories. Mariette, with a smile even louder, calls her mom the most beautiful in the world. The woman agrees with the girl's words. Fina adds that Mariette looks a lot like her and also like Mr. Cullen, as if the girl has adopted the best traits of her parents. Fina was really sorry that Yuri wasn't around them anymore. Maria missed her mother very much in her heart. The girl hugged Fina, remembering Yuri. The next morning, Hilla came to Mariette's room. The man lowered his head, adding that he had heard the girl hurt herself. Mariette showed her knees with small abrasions. Hilla learned that it was very hard for the girl to walk. Hilla adjusted his glasses with shaking hands, assuming that Mariette was in a lot of pain. In her thoughts, the girl was indignant, for she had indeed been hurt when she fell. Hilla takes some ointment out of the first aid kit and adds that the first aid was given in time, and therefore Mariette should not worry too much. The men reapply some of the medicine. Hilla also recalls that he was recently informed about Mariette's numb tongue. Mariette immediately assures that she is fine. Hilla still insists on examining the girl's tongue. In her thoughts, Mariette wanted to ask Hill a lot of things, but realized it wasn't the best atmosphere to do so. Mariette learned a couple days ago that Hilla wasn't planning on going anywhere anytime soon, and she'd get a chance to ask him about stuff. All the while, Mariette was either exploring the space she'd discovered with Kuhn or keeping an eye on Hill. Mariette struggles to keep up with Hill and realizes she won't be able to ask anything at this rate. Mariette did notice that Hilla was a capable person, and if she couldn't awaken her powers, she planned to ask Hilla and learn how to make magical potions. Suddenly, while Mariette was hiding, someone called her away. Mariette was very frightened. It was Hilla. He didn't understand why the girl was following him all the time. Hilla looked questioningly at Mariette, wondering how she was feeling. Mariette covered her mouth and said that all this was surprising to her. The man did not immediately understand what the girl was saying. Mariette added that it was really amazing to her, that a man could make medicines that cure diseases, calling Hilla a wizard. Mariette enthusiastically declares that she too wants to learn, like Hilla, how to make medicine so she can heal her father when he gets hurt. Hilla smilingly wondered what, in other words, Mariette wanted to be his student. Mariette was a little lost at such words. Hilla, having tied everything up, begins now to realize what the girl has been after him for all this time. Mariette realized that it would be enough to be near the man all the time. With a smile, Mariette states that she really wants to be like Hilla, namely an apprentice and help people. Hilla frowned slightly, which Mariette did not notice. Afterward, they both went into the garden. Hilla leads Mariette to a small garden where colors have been planted according to their names. Mariette had never been to this place before. Hilla declares that since Mariette wishes to be his apprentice, he will gladly let her. Hilla points to a small plot and explains that the field of medicinal herbs he tends was given to him by a gentleman. The man wanted to show exactly how he gathers herbs. Mariette didn't understand why Hilla had let her become an apprentice so easily. In reality, Mariette expected Hilla to say that she shouldn't follow him as it was very dangerous. Pointing to one of the beds, the man explains that the ointment used to treat Mariette's knee was made from petals and roots grown in this field. Mariette adds, sitting down next to her, that she thinks these flowers are just pretty. Hilla partially agrees, but adds that in fact they have many medicinal properties, and it happens that the plant looks like a common weed, but in fact it is a very expensive medicinal herb. Mariette wanted to collect these flowers and try to cure her father, but she also realized that if she mistakenly brought him a poisonous herb, she could easily poison Cullen. Hilla plucks the leaves of one of the plants and explains that if prepared properly, they can make useful herbs. Hilla ends it by saying that since he's a doctor, he's obligated to know about it. Mariette was amazed that Hilla was explaining things to her so thoroughly. Mariette asks why the man is only picking the leaves, not the flower itself. Hilla explains that it is best to use only the leaves for Mariette's ointment. The girl did not understand why it was for her. Hilla didn't want to let the girl develop a scar and so decided to prepare everything in advance. The man asks Mariette to be more careful next time and not to mess up her knees. Mariette notices a strange purple plant and wonders what it is. Hilla immediately explains that the plant is called Zamioculcas, which is used to treat wounds. Hilla praises the girl with a smile, for she immediately recognized the right herb for the cure. Mariette laughs along with the man, though she realized she had only assumed because of the flower looking cute. Hilla suggests that Mariette pick the flower herself. Mariette is a little confused, asking if the man is sure because she might pick it wrong. Hilla explains that he'll have to cure the leaves with a mortar anyway, so it's okay. The man holds out a glove to prevent Mariette from getting hurt by the small thorns. Putting on a glove, Mariette carefully plucks a leaf of the plant. Mariette holds out a leaf to Hill, which he was delighted with. The man praises the girl, for she was the first of his pupils to be so capable. Removing her glove, Mariette observes another strange flower, assuming it too is medicinal. In her thoughts, Mariette imagined how beautifully the flowers decorated the whole estate. The girl asks Hill if the flowers are used for medicine. The man explains that they are not for medicines, and the girl can easily pick them and take them for herself. Mariette picks a small amount and makes herself a bouquet. Mariette added with a smile that she wished to distribute them to her father and other people on the estate. Hilla was delighted with this idea. Mariette offers Hill to go with her, but the man refuses, saying he has work to finish. In fact, on the way back, Mariette wanted to ask the man about the witches. Mariette only bid Hilla a kind farewell. She realized that she hadn't reached her goal yet, but since she had managed to become the man's apprentice, she would still have a chance. Mariette ran off, saying goodbye until we meet again soon. The man looking at the leaf was curious as to why Mariette was sneaking around yesterday. Upon arriving at the manor, Mariette held out the flower to her father, to which he was slightly surprised. Mariette tells him that she picked the flowers in a field of medicinal herbs, so she decided to bring some to Cullen as well. The man wonders who the other flowers are for. Mariette added with a smile that she wanted to hand out flowers to the other estate employees. Suddenly, all the flowers are missing from Mariette's hands. Cullen only tells his daughter to give them all to him. Cullen starts walking away with the flowers toward his office. Mariette runs after her father, yelling that she has to give them to the others too. Mariette said indignantly that that was not the way to do it because she wanted to distribute to everyone. Cullen only added coldly that there was no need. Mariette didn't understand why her father did that and just took all the flowers away. Fina and Dante watched on laughing with the sweet girl. On the way, Cullen stops abruptly and Mariette hits her face on her father's leg. The girl is outraged at what is happening. Lowering his head to Mariette, Cullen adds that he'll give her a chocolate cake with strawberries in return. Mariette was surprised by such a thing and at the same time unable to refuse. Eventually, Mariette was already sitting at the table waiting for dessert to be brought to her. At first, Mariette had thought her father cold, but now the girl was beginning to doubt it. While Mariette was daydreaming, Fina brought the girl a long-awaited dessert. On the table under Mariette's hands lay a pencil and pieces of paper. Fina asked what the girl was trying to write. With a smile, Mariette asked Fina to help her write the letter. Fina immediately thought that the letter was addressed to Mr. Mariah explained that she wanted to send a letter to Dahlia because she had always been with her before. So now that they were away from each other, they promised to write letters. Fina happily agrees to help Mariette with the letter writing. Sitting down at the table, Fina clarifies whether she should write instead of Miss Mariette, asks her to write that she is fine. Fina clarifies how she should start writing. Half an hour later, Mariette and Fina finish writing the letter, the girl clarifying with a smile if all they have left to do is send it. Mariette also wanted to send a parcel in which she put everything Dahlia liked. In fact, it was a variety of sweets. Fina asks if Mariette knows where to send the package. Mariette nods affirmatively, adding that her father knows. Mariette takes the parcel with the letter, wanting to get her father's address. Fina asks the girl to take her time. Dante came up quite suddenly, offering his help. Mariette was a little embarrassed to refuse, calling herself strong. Dante was once again disappointed by this, but he confirmed that Mariette is indeed strong. Mariette also recalls her father talking about the imminent arrival of the vassals. Dante confirms the girl's words, for such seasonal gatherings are organized periodically. Mariette wonders, shaking slightly, how long such meetings take. Dante adds that he doesn't know because for the last few years their lord hasn't attended and just received reports, but this time Cullen and Miss will be present, so the meeting will stretch over several days. Mariette, accompanied by Aaron, heads toward her father's study. Mariette wasn't much pleased after all. These were vassals who disliked her mom because of her background, so they definitely wouldn't be happy to have her back. Mariette also noted that Cullen would be personally involved this time, assuming that a bunch of people would gather because of it. Mariette says out loud that she doesn't like these gatherings. Aaron thinks that since the Lord will be there, nothing bad will happen. Mariette was really worried about this. Approaching Cullen's office, Aaron decides to open the doors for Missy. Entering the study, Mariette greeted her father. All Cullen said was that she couldn't go out now. Mariette added that she wasn't going to leave so soon either. Aaron helps Mariette to put the parcel on the master's table. Mariette reports that she has come to give the parcel to her father. Mariette also notices that her father put the flowers in a vase. The girl couldn't be happy that she had brought flowers to the mansion. Cullen wonders what Mariette has brought. The girl also gives the letter and says that she wants to send everything to Dahlia. Mariette explains that she promised to send Dahlia a letter and also decided to put together a package of everything she loved. Mariette looked at her father excitedly and enthusiastically. She wanted Cullen to help her with this. Cullen looks at the letter and asks who helped Mariette write it. The girl immediately says that it was Fina who helped her write the letter. Mariette comes closer and asks her father not to look at other people's letters and not to read anymore. Cullen doesn't listen to his daughter and immediately starts opening the letter. Mariette shouted loudly that she knew it, forbidding her to read it. Cullen begins to dodge Mariette, wanting to read the letter as he was really curious about what his daughter had written. Mariette states that there is nothing in it, but it is meant specifically for Dahlia. Mariette begins to realize that her father is only teasing and apparently has no intention of reading the letter. Mariette wonders if her father can send the package as soon as possible. Cullen wondered what was so urgent in the box. Mariette was worried about the candy she had stacked up. Cullen stated that he would consider it if Mariette wrote a letter to him as well. Mariette looked questioningly at her father, for she could not write at all. Cullen immediately called out to Dante. Dante, as always with charm, replies that he will start looking for a writing teacher. Mariette was surprised that she was already looking for a writing teacher. Mariette didn't want to study at all, for she didn't care for it. Mariette wanted to keep doing tracking and training, saying out loud that she didn't want to learn how to write. Cullen explains that she needs to start anyway. Mariette suggests starting when she's 8 years old. Cullen adds that earlier would be better. The girl starts to haggle, asking for at least 7. Cullen was adamant that we should start right away. Mariette wasn't thrilled at the suggestion. Mariette decides to use a different method and press Dante's pity. But Dante also thought that Mariette should start learning to write, for him to see his master rejoice was one of the most beautiful moments. Suddenly, Aaron decides to clarify whether Mariette wants to send something else along with the parcel. The girl realized that there was nothing she could do about it because everyone would insist. Mariette decides to declare that she will only be willing to learn to write if she is taught by someone she knows. Cullen agrees with a smile. Mariette is still not thrilled with the idea, wondering if her father will respond to her message. Cullen didn't quite understand what answer his daughter was talking about. Mariette realized that she had caught her father, and now he would definitely give up his idea. Mariette adds with a smirk that every letter should be answered with a letter. Cullen, not seeing it as a big deal, agrees to write an answer to Mariette. The girl was not happy about it. Cullen asks in return that Mariette write a letter every week. The girl was panicked by this turn of events. Dante takes the letter with a smile, offering to hand the letter to the coachman. Mariette says goodbye to her father and moves on. Cullen wonders where his daughter is going. Mariette frowned at her father and replied that she was very busy, then slammed the door loudly behind her. Suddenly, Armin's voice could be heard saying that his head was burning again, and his heart hurt so badly that he couldn't breathe. The boy held himself back with all his might. He realized that he should be patient. Another voice is also heard calling out to the boy by name, Prince Arfel. The man reminds Armin that he needs to endure as best he can. The boy replies that he is trying. The priest's cold gaze pierced the defenseless boy. With a small smirk, he looked at all of Armin's suffering. Everyone said that the empire was currently in the hands of the most holy pope, Morkel Laverick. He had numerous followers throughout the empire. Besides, he was the one who placed the current emperor on the throne by divine revelation. At the same time, the man continued to demand that Armin hold back and endure as long as he was told. The current emperor personally handed the prince into Morkal's hands. Armin struggled only to say that he was trying his best. Armin explained through tears that his heart was really hurting. Morkad wonders from the prince if he has a side effect again. Morkad adds that His Majesty will be very upset when he finds out about this. Armin only wished he felt better, but so far he was in great pain and had difficulty breathing. The prince forced himself to swallow his food, for he was vomiting heavily back and also ready always burning. None of the healers of the empire could help Armin. As a result, the emperor turned to the shrine for help and Morkad took over. Upon arriving in the prince's room, Morkad immediately determined that his body's power was very low and regressed. Morkad added that if this continued, the prince would probably die soon, but he knew that the prince was precious to the emperor, so he suggests that he leave him to the shrine. Armin could feel his head burning even after that. The prince was in so much pain that he couldn't even swallow his food anymore, but as time went on, the pain only became more intense. Morkan sums it all up by calling Armin nothing but a monster who killed his mother at birth. The prince begins to cry at what he hears. Armin, hearing this, did not want to continue suffering, wishing to disappear forever. The prince asks Morkan if there is a god, because he wanted to see his mentor. It was only when Armin closed his eyes and visualized his mentor and opened them again that he was in a secret place where he could see him. Armin really liked it that way because he could cry and cry about his pain. Mariette appeared at that moment and started a conversation with him. Armin was amazed to see Mariette in the secret place. It was the first time the prince was talking to his peer. Excluding the emperor and Papa, this was the first time he had spoken to someone. The feeling was really new to him. Armin heard Mariette's story and didn't believe her because he couldn't understand how such a beautiful monster could exist. Armin speculated that if there was, perhaps Mariette was a feline monster that had taken the form of a cat child. The prince was struck by the girl's simplicity. Armin had actually lied about the name, but the prince wished he could confess it to her next time. The pain returned again, and Armin took hold of his chest because of the intense pain. Suddenly, Armin drops a pink handkerchief. Morkad immediately wonders what it was the prince had. Morkad, leaning on his staff, stoops to pick up the shawl. In his heart, Armin wished he could return the handkerchief to Mariette the next time he saw her, but it was too late. Morkad looks at the prince and adds that the handkerchief is too dirty, and if it means nothing to him, it should be burned. Morkad instantly burned the handkerchief before the boy's eyes, the man unwilling to let the prince touch such a foul thing with his precious hands. In his heart, Armin wished he could see Mariette again and talk to her about various topics. The action returns to the manor house. After Mariette heard the shocking news from her father that she would have to write a letter a week, the girl was very frightened. After leaving her father's study, Mariette is in no mood to tell Aaron that writing a letter is too much for her. The man encourages her to write small letters, one verse of poetry at most. Mariette was surprised that Aaron actually had friends. The man described them as being like mammoths who only knew how to use their muscles. Mariette still had no idea how she would write letters, for she had yet to learn letters. Aaron calls his mistress a clever and capable girl. Aaron decides to also recount his observations. The man was struck by the fact that he saw the gentleman relaxed, as if he had been switched. Aaron adds that earlier when he was watching Cullen, he was really hard to watch. Mariette clarifies with Aaron if her father is scary. The man lowers his head and describes the gentleman as ruthless, adding that Cullen had not been like that before. Aaron realizes he has said too much and apologizes to his mistress. Mariette waves it off, explaining that there is nothing wrong with that. Mariette begins to realize that Aaron has been by her father's side all this time, even when he was a tyrant. Suddenly, the girl notices Hilla passing by in the garden. Mariette assumed that Hilla was heading into the woods again. The girl was unwilling to let him go, having followed his actions. Mariette immediately decides to go outside and follow, but while she's outside, she's already missed him. Mariette decides to go to a secret location and wait for him there, assuming that's where Hilla went. Suddenly, Kun appears as well, the keeper greeting the girl. Mariette twitched slightly in surprise, but was still happy to see her friend. Kun wonders what Mariette is doing. The girl tells him that she came to the secret place to follow Hill. Kun also wonders if the girl has learned something interesting and more important. Mariette recalls that last time the boy said he came to the secret place because of the item Hilla had given him. Mariette's strategy was simple. She wanted to catch Hill red-handed when he tried to go through the so-called secret location. Kun didn't really want to get involved in all of this, so he discreetly added that he would go rest for now. Mariette didn't plan to sit alone and let the guardian go. Mariette takes Kun in her arms, pretending to play with a stray cat. The guardian didn't much care for being touched. Mariette noted in her thoughts that she didn't know if Hilla was her friend or not. Because if she started saying out of the blue that she knew about witchcraft and magic, it would be suspicious. Mariette wanted to slur Hilla as naturally as possible. Suddenly, Hilla himself comes out from behind a tree. Mariette immediately takes notice, beckoning to the one. Mariette wondered with a smile how Hilla had shown up so suddenly. Seeing the absence of Hill's hand from behind the portal, Mariette also adds that she doesn't realize where the man's hand is. In her heart, Mariette gloated, for she had managed to catch Hilla off guard just as she had planned. Hilla states without any interest that Mariette just imagined it and the tree just covered his elbow. Mariette tries to catch up with the man and claims that she saw everything and even how the man appeared out of nowhere. Hilla stops abruptly and turns to Mariette. The man reiterates that the girl had imagined it, as she was busy playing with the cat, adding that a person can't come out of nowhere. Mariette continued to insist with a smile, wondering exactly how he did it. Hilla remembers that it's lunchtime and Mariette is usually asleep, assuming that the servants are already looking for the girl. Mariette explains that she can stay up tonight, continuing to insist that Hilla teach her the same trick. Hilla reassures Mariette that she was just imagining things. Mariette's idea of following the man was sure that everyone had seen, and she was definitely not imagining it because she had gone in there. Hilla was amazed that the girl was able to go in there too, but didn't give any sign of it, adding that she was dreaming. Mariette stated loudly that she wasn't dreaming and knew about everything. Suddenly, Mariette decides to describe the boy she saw there. Hilla was even more surprised because he knew who it was about. Hilla turns to the girl in silence. Mariette wondered with a smile if she had said the right thing. Hilla kneels down in front of Mariette and asks when the girl last saw him. Mariette says that only a couple of days ago she followed him into the woods, and after tripping and falling, she found herself in a strange place where the boy was crying. Mariette added that she helped the boy wipe away his tears and he disappeared, wondering if he was Hilla's friend. Mariette realized that she shouldn't tell everything at once, especially that Armin was Hilla's student. The man lowered his head and said with a serious face that the girl had only imagined it. Mariette calls the man a liar. She saw the secret space the man made, wondering how the man erected it. Hilla put his hand to his forehead with nerves. He was really stumped, especially since Mariette had described everything in great detail as it happened. Mariette wondered excitedly if it was magic. She was curious what other magic there was and why Hilla was making up all sorts of nonsense. Hilla interjects why he's making it up, since last time Mariette put the whole estate on edge by drinking the medicine without permission, and now he's making up tall tales from his dream. Mariette thundered that she had seen magic, as if a witch had conjured it. The man realized that this was the edge of no return, and he had to act. The man shouted loudly at Mariette. The girl was slightly startled by this, not expecting that the man could yell at her. Hilla explains to the girl that in the divine empire of the queen, she should not utter such dangerous words, magic or witches, all these things that should not exist. Mariette did not like such wording as should not exist. Hilla added that it was exactly that, for the girl should not mention something so horrible in public. Kun only sat silently in Mariette's arms and watched what was happening. Mariette actually thought in her mind that she had finally met a like-minded person, that she could share her secrets with him. It also dawned on her that if Hilla had been so eager to hide his connection to the witches, he hadn't made a field with medicinal herbs and magical cures. Mariette also reminisced about her mother, who had been really good to her, and if it hadn't been for the horrible priest, she would have Haya her whole life bathed in Juri's love. Mariette couldn't let someone insult her like that. Hilla asks the girl to forget everything that happened. Mariette screamed sharply that it was horrible, not wanting to hear how bad witches were. Looking at Hilla's face, Mariette calls the man a coward, which struck the man hard. After that, Mariette silently walked away to the end of the corridor. As they climbed the stairs, Mariette assured Kun with a smile that everything was fine, and she hadn't known that Hilla would say that. Kun was glad of that, adding that their visit hadn't been in vain after all. Kun casually said that he had managed to find out Hilla's affiliation. Mariette was shocked, not understanding how he had managed to find out. Kuhn jumped on the nearest windowsill and explained that he saw a witch's mark. Witches were very proud of their powers, and therefore used magic to leave special patterns on their bodies. Kuhn added that only a person with witch's blood flowing in them could see the mark. So witches don't need to talk about their origins. They can recognize each other from this pattern by feeling a connection. Mariette was surprised to hear all of this. She had no idea that even witches, who alone tried to become stronger, needed like-minded people. Kuhn was nearby for now, looking closely at Hilla while Mariette spoke to him and found Dima's mark on his wrist. Kuhn assured Mariette that when she got her powers, she would be able to see them too, assuming the pattern was left by someone in his family. Kuhn picked up on the fact that although Hilla was a male, the deceased marker meant that he had most likely inherited the strength and knowledge of proper handling of medicinal and poisonous herbs. Mariette was glad that she was able to learn about Hilla's family. Mariette clutched the dress in her hand. She was still hurt by the man's words. Mariette was already thinking of a future plan in her mind. She wanted, if she couldn't get a deal, she wanted to start blackmailing Hilla. Kuhn starts pushing the windows with his paw, wanting to go and look for something useful for Mariette. Before leaving, Kuhn wonders if Mariette remembers what power her mom had. Kuhn added that it was possible she had innate abilities that she had inherited. The Guardian had never heard of the Dilton family before, nor had he observed the markings on the girl's body. In her thoughts, Mariette noted that she really didn't know what powers her mother possessed, for she had never mentioned them. Kuhn, reincarnating as a raven, asks Mariette to think carefully and remember something. Saying goodbye to Mariette behind appears Fina, immediately turning to Miss. Mariette turned to Fina. The girl was shocked at how much wool was on Mariette's dress. Fina suggests that Mariette go wash up. The girl didn't really want to do that. Fina decides with a smile to offer an alternative and help Mariette wipe the girl with wet towels and brush her hair. Mariette happily agrees. In her heart of hearts, Mariette never wanted to see Fina turned away besides Hilla, for she treasured the girl very dearly. 2 days later, Mariette was already sitting in the classroom. Hilla informs her that she is now in charge of Mrs. Letter. Mariette wasn't thrilled about it. Turning away, she declared that she was against it. Hilla states that he volunteered and also wanted to apologize to Mariette for his words. The man lowered his head, adding that he had overreacted greatly and apologized sincerely to Mariette. Mariette folded her arms and reiterated that she hadn't lied then. Hilla added that he knew it. Mariette says it wasn't a dream and it was Hilla who was lying. Hilla has to do nothing but agree with the girl. Hilla puts the book on the table. The man understood that he had no right to do so, but still decides to ask Mariette for a favor. The girl clarifies what exactly Hilla wanted to ask. Hilla puts up her hand and asks that Mariette keep their conversation a secret and not tell anyone. The girl immediately agrees. In her heart, Mariette realized that she couldn't tell her father anyway. Hilla decides to clarify whether the girl heard something strange when she entered the secret place. Mariette replied that she hadn't seen or felt anything. Hilla was mildly interested, saying aloud that it couldn't be. Hilla asks the next leading question, whether the girl felt any discomfort. Mariette again answers in the negative, assuming in her heart that in all likelihood it was some kind of curse or trap. Hilla explains that in fact the boy was his student. Mariette wonders how she is. Hilla nods approvingly, adding that he taught him writing and history. Mariette was surprised that the man also knew history well, calling him very smart. Hilla explains that he's been doing research on history since way back when, and he just had a chance to take the boy as a student, so he decided to be his teacher. Hilla added that he has grown very attached to the boy over the past year. Hill was alarmed that there were so many wounds on the boy's body. So he gave him one thing as a gift so that it might help the boy a little. Mariette decides to find out what the thing was. Hilla tells her that it has been handed down from generation to generation and is his mother's legacy. With the help of one part, you can mark coordinates and create invisible barriers. And with the help of another, you can teleport into the enclosed space. Mariette begins to realize that because of the barriers, subspace wasn't even visible. Mariette asks another leading question if it has anything to do with the patterns on his wrist and the medicine he's giving Cullen. Hilla is wary of what he hears. Hilla lowered his head and wondered how much more Mariette knew about him. Mariette clarifies if Hilla will also keep it a secret if she tells all. The man adds that the sword was now in Mariette's hands and he could not dictate terms. Mariette picked up on the fact that Hilla had started this conversation first and asked her about it. Hilla coughs and agrees to keep the secret and not divulge it to anyone from now on. Mariette declares with a smile that even though she doesn't have a mark on her, she's as much a witch as he is. Hilla started pacing around the room, muttering the word witch to himself. At one point, Hilla stops and declares that Marriott should not be messing around with such serious things. Marriott states that she is serious and is not trying to make a joke. Marriott adds, "One feather, three voices, the birth of a black king," wondering if Hill knows these lines. Hilla was amazed that the girl knew about it. Marriott realized that Hilla couldn't help but know this as a descendant of a witch, because in the original story, those lines of the poem are famous for being known only by the descendants of witches. They marked the moment when the first witches appeared in this world, but their detailed meaning was nowhere described. Hilla is slowly beginning to accept the fact that it could be true. Marriott didn't understand why the man would say allow it if she really was a witch. Hilla began to pace the room again and ponder what he had heard. For if it were true, Marriott didn't realize how dangerous a statement she had just made. Hilla wonders what would happen if he went and reported it to the shrine. Marriott asks with a smile a counter-question, why would he do that? After all, he only came to teach her. Hilla declares that he's not pathetic enough to snitch on a little girl. Marriott waves her off, adding that it's useless to snitch on her now anyway. Marriott explains that her powers have not yet awakened so that the priests will not recognize that she is a witch. Marriott wonders about Hilla. Would she tell him everything so easily if she knew that he might denounce her in the future? Hilla noticed that Marriott really couldn't be fooled. Afterwards, Marriott told Hilla that she had inherited a witch's power, thanks to which she remembered her past life and many other things. Hilla, after hearing this, only said that he now began to understand why Marriott was stalking and why she was so mature despite her young age. Marriott is surprised that the man knew about the stalking all along. Hill was surprised that Marriott thought he didn't know, for constantly the girl was making various rustling noises. The man adds that he is interested in a lot of things, but since this is their first damage, they should postpone discussions for another time. Hilla moves closer to the table, deciding to ask one last thing. Kneeling down and lowering his head, Hilla wonders why Marriott needs him. Marriott was interested in how well succeeded Dima Hill's recipes were. Marriott added that she'd heard there was some paralyzing medicine he'd prescribed for her father that had strong side effects. But the man was able to not only make the medicine more effective, so still managed to get rid of the adverse reactions and the ointment as well, which he applied to Marriott's knee. Marriott calls Hilla capable of doing something much better than this. Earlier, Kuhn told her that Dema's recipe was made to compete with Hasht. It has no material form and is passed on to the descendants through their minds. Marriott at that moment didn't think it was possible. Kuhn added that no one is able to steal it because the recipe is carefully kept. Therefore, to know it, one must hear it in person from the mouth of a Dima descendant. Marriott explains to Hilla that she doesn't know what her power is, but the knowledge will help in her awakening. Marriott gets up from her chair, adding that if things work out with Dima's recipe, she'll help Hilla as well. Marriott knew that Hilla wanted to find her family. The man even twitched slightly at what he heard. Hilla really wanted to know how exactly Marriott found out about it, but realized that she wouldn't tell about it. The girl apologizes to the man. Hilla says there is no need for that, wondering what is required of him. Marriott wished, for starters, for the man to develop a cure that could awaken the powers and conceal them. Also, Marriott wanted Hilla to make a medicine that would help her get the man to talk if she asked. Hilla agrees to the girl's decision. Marriott places her hands on Hilla's, adding that she really wants to become his apprentice and learn a lot from him, because that way she can become stronger. Marriott wished to become stronger, and besides just surviving Still Sleep and Daddy and the others. Hilla didn't see anything like that, so he agrees to make the girl his apprentice. Fixing his glasses and smirking, Hilla remembered that he was just in need of an assistant. Hilla did change and became even intimidating, for this suggestion was good for him as well. Marriott was slightly wary, the air becoming stranger. The temple blesses people, restores depleted lands, and cures infectious diseases. As a result, the temple is honored by the people and even gains some power. However, people don't know everything. Cullen did not immediately know that he had lost Marriott and Yuri. After that, he became a tyrant and betrayed the emperor's trust. During this time, the temple purposely spread an epidemic to sow panic among the people. During this chaos, it is unknown what fell into his hands, but the Pope claimed to have received a revelation from God, gaining tremendous power. He began to heal people of their diseases. As a result, Daddy took over again and deposed Marriott's father. This immense power that praises people is still unknown to the girl, but with its help, she could prevent her from contracting infectious diseases. Marriott really needed Hilla to prepare for the infection. Hilla notices that the girl is very calm. Hilla added that contrary to the memories of her previous life, Mariette was only 6 years old, and how many hardships she had to overcome to gain such peace of mind, not even the man knew. Mariette smilingly asks Hilla to calm down, because her mom has always been there for her and protected her in difficult moments. Mariette added that if it hadn't been for her mom, she never would have met her father, but if it was revealed that she was a witch, she and her father were in danger. Mariette picked up on the fact that, like Hilla said, she could be captured, but she didn't want to be afraid and hide anymore. Mariette wanted to live a normal and happy life. That's why the girl asks Hilla for help. Hilla, realizing everything, decides to end the questioning at this point. The man didn't want to complicate Mariette's already difficult life. Hilla shows his heart with a smile, explaining that this place is precious to him too, as he's not sure if his information will be useful, but he'll try to help Mariette. Mariette was delighted by the man's words. Hilla immediately tells her that there are things that perhaps the girl needs to know in advance. Hilla said that Dima's prescriptions are not completely completed by him, and there are things that he has not yet been able to get, and in some matters he has failed. The man was able to successfully complete all but 4, so he hopes he can be of service to Mariette. Hilla also compliments that there are minor problems with his prescriptions as well. Mariette didn't even think that a man could have any problems. Hilla explains that as Mariette already knows there are witches in his bloodline, but he can't use their powers, and if it weren't for his witch sisters, he wouldn't even know about the recipes. Mariette realizes that Hilla wished to find his sisters. Hilla tells him that to complete Dima's recipe, he needs to invest mana, the source of the witch's power, to make it as flawless as possible. Hilla added that for ordinary people, the difference in the effect of the medicine might be negligible or even of little consequence. For real witches, it would seem bland at all. Hilla remembers his sister calling it like drinking fresh water. Mariette nods her head, pretending she understood. Hilla adjusts her glasses to see if Mariette has understood. The girl tastes the milk and water and only turns up her nose, calling it unpalatable. Hilla continues her training by telling her that in any case, the more complex the process of making the medicine, the more important magical energy becomes, and because of this, the frequency can go down. Mariette realizes that all she has to do is help make the perfect prescription. Hilla nods her head in response, adding that first of all, Mariette will have to figure out which witch family she's from, because both the Descartes and the Diltons have nothing to do with witches. Mariette hears for the first time that the Diltons have nothing to do with witches. Hilla confirms, suggesting that they are a fake family created by someone to avoid the temple people. Several days passed after this conversation. It was the last week of the month, and finally the day came when the vassals gathered. Mariette, choosing clothes for the vassals' reception, was overwhelmed by the chic and luxurious dresses. Fina explains that it is the day of the regular meeting, and that is why they have chosen the most colorful and beautiful clothes for Mariette. The girl realized that she had always worn only her mother's clothes before, so she didn't know she could afford such clothes. With a smile, Fina added that this would be the day Mariette was officially introduced to everyone. All the maids were thrilled about it. Mariette looks around and points to one of the dresses, wanting to wear it. Fina says excitedly that she knew it, because she was the one who chose the dress for Mariette. The other maids also wished that Mariette would wear their dresses. Not wanting to offend anyone, Mariette offered to wear all the dresses on different days. The maids were delighted at the suggestion. After that, the maids amicably helped Miss Mariette into her dress. Already in the banquet hall, Cullen complimented his daughter on her beautiful dress. Mariette thanked her father in return. She was really pleased that he had noticed her. The cook came over with a smile and said that he was cooking for Mariette, wishing her a pleasant appetite. The girl thanked him for his concern. Mariette was delighted with the large, sumptuous table, but she couldn't be distracted by the fact that there was a meeting coming up that day. Placing the glass on the table, Cullen turns sharply to his daughter, to which Mariette responds. Cullen thoughtfully offers to stay with him that day if Mariette wishes to do so. After breakfast, Mariette went to Hill's office. The man grinned, noting that he now understood why the girl looked like a princess. Mariette was really embarrassed that everyone cared about her more than usual on this day. The girl really liked the dress. Hilla pulls a small box out of her pocket and hands it to Mariette to take. The girl assumed it was medicine. Mariette opens the box and observes small pebbles of blue and pink colors. Hilla explains that the pink ones are truth serum and the blue ones are concealment spells. Hilla turned away and added that he felt like a criminal while he was making these medicines. Mariette didn't understand why the man had said that. Mariette wonders why all the medicine is made in candy form, since she assumed it would be in potion form like her father's. Hilla explained this decision by saying that it would be inconvenient for Mariette to carry the potions around, and if the vessel was damaged, it would be a big problem. Hilla also explains that the whole serum is completely tasteless. Hilla adds that the pink candies dissolve in water for a duration of about 10 minutes, while the blues are effective for about 10 minutes. Hilla walked over to the table and decides to wrap the candy in wrappers. The man realized that this could be a hindrance to Mariette's growth potential, so he made their exposure long, and to make them more sustainable, they would need to spend more time researching. Hilla folds all the candies and hands them to Mariette, noting that as long as they are folded like this, it will be easier for the girl to use and carry them around. Hilla adds that he has not observed any side effects, but warns Mariette not to use more than one pellet. Hilla flashes back to Armin, wondering if he's coming to the meeting. Hilla didn't immediately realize who he was talking about. Mariette reminded once again of Armin, who was the man's apprentice. Hilla smiled. He clarifies that having met only once, they had managed to become friends. Mariette says she didn't understand, but the boy asked if he could come back next time. Mariette was truly sad, for Arfel had cried the first time they met. Hilla nods his head, assuring me that this kid isn't looking for that spot, which means he's actually gotten better. Hilla, looking out the window, added that if Mariette met the boy again, she would play with him for a while because Arfel was really lonely. Before leaving, Hilla advises Mariette to concentrate and deal with her emotions to increase her power, because everything she felt will help the girl, clarifying that including feelings of fear can become her power. By the time Mariette had left the room after listening to Hill's advice, the mansion had begun to fill with people who had come from all over the country. All these people looked at Mariette with hostility. In Mariette's fantasy, all the guests had sinister smiles and blood-red eyes. The girls covered their taunts with fans, and the men turned away. Mariette was scared and didn't want to see all those cold stares, so she preferred to just play with Kuhn in the garden until dinner. Suddenly, Mariette meets Arfel in the garden and greets him with a smile, pointing a finger. The boy greeted Mariette back in a confused manner. Arfel even forgot Mariette's name from the moment's excitement, for which he immediately apologized. Mariette didn't even think she would see Arfel so soon. The boy wonders how Mariette managed to come to the secret place again, because his teacher said that no one could enter it. The girl explains that Hilla himself allowed her to come. Mariette got up from the grass, offering to call Hilla over to them. Arfel reached for her confusedly and told her not to bother. Arfel lowers his head, adding that they'll be in trouble if Hilla finds out. Mariette assumes that Hilla loves Arfel, checking with the latter to see if this is the case. Arfel got upset with tears in his eyes, interjecting if that was the case. Mariette laughed back, confirming it, also offering a chocolate bar to the boy. Mariette realized that if Hill didn't like it, he wouldn't have asked her to play with Arfel. Mariette handed the candy bar to Arfel, adding to herself that she had befriended him anyway. Arfel immediately decides to try the candy. Mariette wonders if the boy liked it. Arfel chews the candy but suddenly becomes stunned, startling Mariette a little. The girl asks what is wrong with Arfel. Arfel began to cry again, explaining that he had been unable to bring Mariette's handkerchief. Mariette assures her with a smile that there is nothing wrong with that. Wiping away her tears, Arfel adds that next time he will bring her a present too. Seeing Arfel's wrist, Mariette moves closer and lifts her sleeves, seeing the boy's bluish-colored hands. Arfel reassures Mariette, saying that he's had all these injuries for a long time and everything is fine. Mariette realized that was impossible, and they were clearly fresh marks. Mariette recalls how in a past life she had boys like Arfel, noticing that the boy was always crying, assuming he was beaten by his parents too. Mariette thinks Hilla is the only one Arfel can rely on, Mariette clarifies, scolding the boy recently. Arfel only brushes it off immediately. Mariette, seeing that everything was all right, added that Hilla didn't like people who lied. The girl realized that Hilla had never said that to him. Arfel puts his head down and struggles to explain that he disobeyed and it's all his fault. Mariette decides to give Arfel a special ointment that will help him. Arfel doesn't really understand why he needs it, explaining that he's fine. Mariette teased the boy and added that if he disobeyed, Hilla would find them. Arfel opened the box of ointment and took a bigger one. Mariette sees this and immediately stops the boy. Mariette helps Arfel apply the ointment to his hands. The girl assured him that it would heal faster if he applied a little and regularly. Arfel shyly thanked Mariette for her concern. Suddenly, a golden light appears around the couple, which slightly startled Mariette because she didn't expect it. Mariette finds herself in an unknown place. Mariette asks loudly where they have been transported to. Arfel apologizes fearfully, explaining that he lives here. Arfel didn't think it was possible, for he wanted to return alone without Mariette. It was not clear to Mariette where exactly Arfel lived, for there was no furniture or windows. It was also unclear to Mariette why the room was so bright. The girl had many questions, including how a small child could live alone in such a place. Mariette heard a strange rustle and fearfully covered Arfel's body. The girl didn't realize who exactly was approaching. At this moment, Arfel was trembling all over, and if it was because of his parents, then they were in danger. Suddenly, a sinister look appeared in the gap, staring as if into his soul. Mariette realized they had nowhere to hide. Going through all the options, the girl was ready to even apologize. Mariette wanted to do whatever it took to be sent home or to ask for help. A sinister figure in a white robe slowly approached the couple. All Mariette could do was call out for her father. She was really scared. She couldn't even look at the unknown man. Mariette also noted that the room was quite bright, but suddenly everything went dark. The man looked at the unknown girl in silence. Mariette hugged Arfel with all her might out of fright. Mariette didn't understand the unknown man's intentions at all. The man in turn bent towards the couple and watched in silence. Mariette assumed that the man wanted to take Arfel with him or herself. Suddenly the man was distracted by a strange sound from behind him. Mariette and Arfel had been under a strange black dome the whole time. Another man appeared in the doorway. Morcard wonders where Arfel might have gone. The subordinate confusedly explains that he asked Arfel to wait in the room and maybe he went out for a while. It all seemed strange to Morcard, as if he could sense Mariette and Arfel's presence in the room. The subordinate lunges out that for his holiness will find Arfel immediately. Morcard goes out to follow his subordinate. Mariette was amazed that the man called the other his holiness. Mariette couldn't believe it was really him, not understanding why he had just walked away without noticing their presence. Mariette exhaled heavily, falling to the floor. She was really scared at that moment. Mariette wonders why the saint did not see them. Arfel asks the girl to take his hand again. Mariette did not understand why Arfel needed her hand. The boy took his own hand and lifted Mariette to her feet. Mariette did not expect Arfel to be so strong, even though he seemed frail. The boy said that they had to get out of here immediately because it was dangerous. Mariette clarifies why it's dangerous at his house, since it was his parents. Arfel adds that they were not his parents. Arfel led Mariette behind him, offering to discuss the details later. Mariette was really uncomfortable with what was happening. Following Arfel, Mariette's eyes suddenly began to blur and everything around her began to swim. In the next instant, Kuhn shouts fearfully toward the girl. The guardian runs to his mistress. Mariette was lying on the grass, in pain and still floating. Standing up from the grass, Mariette didn't realize how she had managed to get back, assuming that Kuhn had led her back. Kuhn wondered where Mariette had disappeared to. Kuhn could not believe that Mariette had met the Pope. Mariette explained that since he was addressed as His Holiness, it was probably the Pope. Mariette added that also that man could not see their presence, not understanding how this could have happened. Kuhn explains that the reason Papa couldn't see Mariette is simple. The girl was able to use the witch's magic. Mariette couldn't understand how it was possible, since she hadn't done anything to make it happen. Kuhn clarifies how he brought the girl here then, since the day Mariette called him, they are connected. Kuhn added that when she used the witch's power, the waves transferred to him as well. Kuhn simply brought Mariette here using the girl's power. It was hard for Mariette to realize that it was with the help of her powers that this happened. Mariette explains to Kuhn that she doesn't know what power she could have used. Kuhn offers to show the girl. Kuhn asks to take his paw. Mariette gently takes the keeper by the paw. Suddenly there was a breeze. But it wasn't really, for the wind was coming right out of Mariette's body, and that was unusual for a girl. Mariette begins to realize what her ability was. Kuhn clarifies if the girl doesn't realize what it was, explaining that it was the ability to summon clouds. Kuhn also points out that a border appeared near the girl, appearing because of the barrier she created, adding that not every witch has the strength to see what's inside. So Papa didn't pretend he didn't see them, he really didn't. Kuhn calls this ability rare and useful, as it can be used to hide from others. Mariette begins to recall that it really did get dark at that moment, and it was all because of her ability. Mariette asks the guardian if she is now a witch. Kuhn calls the question silly because she was a witch from the beginning, but Mariette just didn't use her powers. With delight, Mariette asks if she is now like a real witch. Kuhn is confused and calls Mariette a real witch. Mariette was thrilled that she had finally succeeded in becoming a real witch. Kuhn was starting to get a little uneasy. Mariette realized in a moment that she was saying it too loudly, whispering to Kuhn that Hilla had told her that all emotions were important, and thanks to her fright, she was able to use her powers. Kuhn states that either way, congratulations on the fact that Mariette can now use her powers, and for now she is only having trouble hiding her body. When she increases her power, she will be able to hide this mansion and the forest as well. Kuhn also added that perhaps she could create new spaces at will. Mariette suggested that it would be like a hiding place for Arfel. Kuhn explains that it's completely different, because there a mediator is used. There you can only hide by making a boundary around it, but Mariette can create completely different spaces at will, and it's completely different. Kuhn proposes to increase Mariette's strength so that she can hide an entire forest. For this purpose, the Guardian planned to bring a lot of herbs. Mariette decides to train even harder from now on. Kuhn also asks Mariette not to overdo it because recovery takes a long time after using all the magic. Back at the mansion and sitting at the table, Mariette was amazed at the number of carriages still arriving at the estate. Fina, standing next to Madame, suggests that this was the last carriage. Fina also assumed that the last carriage must have belonged to Viscount Roel. Mariette notices a girl coming out of the carriage. It was the Viscount's eldest daughter, Luca Roel, and the Viscount's son, Louis Roel. Mariette was thrilled that the Viscount had children, and they were also attending the council. Fina explained that the children wanted to come to the convention themselves. Fina added with a smile that maybe Mariette would make some good friends now. Mariette wanted to make friends herself. Suddenly, Luca notices Mariette standing on the balcony. Mariette has a sudden feeling that something very good is going to happen today, assuming it is because she has seen the new children. Upon meeting the children, Luca decides immediately to declare that he is going to become Luca Descartes, but sees no need to explain this to them since they are of inferior girl origin. Luca adds with a sneer that perhaps Mariette doesn't even know what she's talking about. Mariette was furious because the girl was cocky and arrogant for her age.